Chapter 1550. All good things must come to an end. In the end, Zhao Ningxin was persuaded by Bai Yu to leave the mountain. Bai Yu's eyes weren't good, so he didn't send him off. Before leaving, Bai Yu told Zhao Ningxin that he might as well go to the Earth-Long Mountain where the evil dragon was killed and live in seclusion. He also told Zhao Ningxin not to involve the Dragon Tiger Mountain in the waves. Great Peace City had Prime Minister Zhao Danping to support the Taoist master residents, so Liang wouldn't make things too difficult for the Taoist master residents. Zhao Ningxin was worried. Clearly, he was worried about Mr. White Lotus becoming a hostage in Beiliang. Bai Yu didn't care. He comforted him and said that Su Fengnian and Beiliang might not even be able to cross the river. It was too early to burn the bridge. After Zhao Ningxin left the mountain alone, Su Fengnian, who had to change into a clean set of clothes, appeared beside Bai Yu. Zhao Ningxin going to the #1 blessed land of Taoism, Earth-Long Mountain, to cultivate was a private deal between him and Bai Yu. Dragon Tiger Mountain had schemed against the Su family 3 times. The first time was under the old locust tree in the capital to steal the fate. The second time was when the old Taoist master who was like a child came personally to kill Su Fengnian. This time, Zhao Ningxin didn't hesitate to use his life golden lotus to guide the flying sword. How could Su Fengnian just let Bai Yu stay in Beiliang to manage the government affairs with a smile? If it wasn't for the sake of Huang Man, or his master Zhao Shituan, even if Su Fengnian let Zhao Ningxin leave Beiliang, he would definitely make this noble with the same surname as the country suffer. Bai Yu lowered his head to look at the mountain path. With his poor eyesight, he couldn't see Zhao Ningxin's figure clearly. He said softly, "According to what the Lord said, Earth-Long Mountain is not only a blessed land of Taoism, but also the place where the Zhao family of Liang suppressed the rivers and mountains in the south." Zhao Huangchao, who lived in seclusion in Dragon Tiger Mountain, failed. First, the Black Dragon was injured by the Wudang leader Li Yufu. Then, even Zhao Huangchao himself was killed by the Lord. Then Zhao Ningxin quietly entering the Earth-Long Mountain, which is still sealed by the imperial court, is tantamount to stealing from the Liang royal family. This matter, if it was someone else, they really couldn't do it. Only Zhao Ningxin was the most suitable. Firstly, his surname is Zhao and he has the advantage of being close to the water pavilion. Secondly, Zhao Ningxin is a person who carries the fate of a sect. Furthermore, now that the Qi cultivators of the Liang North sect are almost all dead, and the last bit of vitality was used to forge the sword in the Donghua sword pool. When Mr. Bai Yu came down the mountain for the first time, it was not to have an audience with the current emperor, but to have a private meeting with the crown prince of Nanjiang, Zhao Zhu. Seeing the flood dragon but not the dragon, isn't it because you want to create the merit of supporting the dragon and become a minister who follows the dragon? Mr. White Lotus smiled and said, "But now, I have no choice but to be trapped in northern Liang for 2 whole years. Even if I succeed by a fluke, the merit of raising the flood dragon into a dragon will inevitably be greatly reduced. Does the Lord not have anything to say?" Su Fengnian turned his head and said playfully, "Mister's words are not kind. Right now, Zhao Zhu is being held back by the #1 general of the southern border, Wu Zhongshuan. The troops that he can barely mobilize are the 2,000 to 3,000 that went up north to quell the rebellion. Most of them were borrowed from Wu Zhongshuan. Right now, Mr. is staying by Zhao Zhu's side. Even the cleverest housewife cannot cook without rice. Other than staring at the crown prince of Yanqi, what else can you do? It's better to go at the right time than early. I'm thinking for Mr.'s sake. When Mr. has accumulated enough prestige in northern Liang, Zhao Zhu will let Mr. take charge of a department. When the conditions are right, success will follow naturally." Bai Yu smiled bitterly. "In that case, I have to thank the Lord for his good intentions." Su Fengnian said with a smile, "We'll be under the same roof for the next 2 years. It's tacky to say thanks." When the two returned to the thatched hut, Bai Yu took the initiative to speak. "Prince, please tell me about the situation in northern Liang. I'm kind enough to know what's going on." Otherwise, if I go to Deputy Administrator Song of Mount Qingliang, I'll be in the dark and become a joke. This pair of disappointing eyes of mine is not far from being blind. Su Fengnian was momentarily distracted. For some reason, he remembered the blind chess player Lu Su who made a living by gambling on chess in Yongzi Alley in Qingzhou. This person had successfully assisted Zhao Sun in stabilizing his position as king of Jing'an. He had also planned the 1,000-mile rescue at Guangling Road. He had helped Zhao Sun win the praise of the Liang court and the initial trust of the court. He had finally attracted the attention of the Lord of Heaven, who took drastic measures to summon him to Great Peace City. It was not strange that Lu Su did not agree to come to Beiliang. However, Lu Su's calmness in going to the capital was puzzling. Su Fengnian collected his scattered thoughts and said slowly, Huda City has Lu Jinu presiding over military affairs. This is Beiliang's greatest fortune. It won't be a problem to defend it for another half a year. However, this is on the premise that the three towns of Huaiyang Pass, Liuya, and Fuling don't divide their forces. If Qingzhang City of Liuzhou or Xiaoguang City of Yuzhou are in danger, any one of the battlefronts will be in danger. When the time comes, we'll have no choice but to have Yuzhou's Horned Eagle Commandant Luo Hongkai or Lingzhou's Pearl Commandant Huang Xiaokuai rush to the battlefield. However, before the new city in Liangbei is even larger than Huda City is built, the pressure of transporting troops on such a large scale and over such a long distance is far too great. I'm afraid that not only will we be exhausted, in the end, we won't be able to put out a nearby fire. Therefore, from the looks of it, although our Beiliang has a firm advantage on the battlefield, on the invisible battlefield, we're at most on par with Liangmang. Over at the mouth of the gorge, Xiaoguang City is the last major border city. Yan Wenluan has already issued a military order to Mount Qingliang and the Protectorate. He said that if Xiaoguang City is breached by Beimang before Huda City, then he, Yan Wenluan, will have his vice commander, Chen Yinchue, carry his head to Huaiyang Pass. Su Fengnian gently exhaled. With a grave expression, he said, Beimang probably didn't expect that Liangzhou and Yuzhou would reach such a stalemate, so they're also trying hard to find a way out. Therefore, some time ago, Dongzhou, the great king of the southern courtyard, sent several tens of thousands of Dong family's private army north of Huda City to Liuzhou. Fortunately, as Chu Lushan predicted, he managed to tie down the Dong family's cavalry with 8,000 cavalry. Otherwise, the outcome of the battle in Liuzhou would have been too horrible to contemplate. This battle, which neither side publicized, was actually the most hair-raising battle since the start of the war in Liangmang. Although both sides didn't suffer much losses, as long as Chu Lushan's 8,000 cavalry didn't succeed, he would be able to preserve his own forces and not give the Dong family's cavalry a chance to quickly break into Liuzhou. Otherwise, even if Chu Lushan paid the enormous price of losing all 8,000 of his men in battle to wipe out 20,000 of the Dong family's cavalry, as long as the remaining 10,000 managed to infiltrate Liuzhou, once they joined forces with Lu Gui's army and Tuoba Bodhisattva's personal army, Liuzhou would be as good as gone. Outside the western gate of Liangzhou, we could only watch as the reinforcements of Beimang galloped as they pleased. Not to mention that we can't build that new city in Beiliang. With enough troops to move and store, we can launch an attack on Huaiyang Pass in one go. Of course, now that the situation is different, teacher and I won't hide it anymore. That Ko Jianghuai, whose reputation has risen in Guangling, is already our new general in Liuzhou, and he's successfully leading troops to reinforce Qingzhang City. Baiyu softly said, it seems like Protector General Chu really is the nemesis of Beimang's Dongzhou. Back then, in the first battle between Liang and Beimang, if not for Protector General Chu spoiling Dongzhuo's plans, he might have already become the youngest general in Beimang's history. Today, Protector General Chu is personally leading 8,000 cavalry. It's like a divine army descending from the heavens, causing Dongzhuo to once again fail on the verge of success. Su Fengnian nodded and joked, Southern Chu and Northern Dong are two fatties. It's probably because our Protector General is a little fatter that he has an advantage in battle. Bai Yu suddenly sighed with emotion. I never thought that there would be a day like today, that I would be able to fight side by side with Bei Mang's enemies, Lu Jinu, the great demon of spring and autumn, Chu Lushan, the commander of Beiliang's infantry, Yan Wenluan, the #1 man of the old southern Tang, great ancestor Gu, and so on. Su Fengnian laughed and said, You'll get used to it. Perhaps it's because I grew up here a long time ago that I don't quite have teacher's feelings. Bai Yu softly muttered, If there comes a day when you get used to this place and can't bear to leave, then what should you do? Chapter 1551. Su Fengnian shook his head and said, Very difficult. Bai Yu quickly understood what he meant. The chances of Beiliang winning were too small. Regardless of whether Bai Yu wanted to stay in Beiliang or not, he had no choice. Perhaps when the time came, he would have to flee to the central plains with many scholars. Behind him was the bleak battlefield of Beiliang, where blood flowed for thousands of miles. Furthermore, he, Bai Yu, wanted to have a place in the imperial court where the civil officials stood, and not the military side. His words just now were just a spur of the moment. So he grunted, That's true. Approaching the cottage, Bai Yu asked, Is there a geographical map of Beiliang in the cottage? There were a few in the residence of the Taoist master, but they were all too old and crude. Liu Zhou was not among them. Su Fengnian brought Mr. White Lotus, who seemed to have mysteriously become Beiliang's advisor, in with him. He took out a map and spread it out on the table. It was already dusk. Su Fengnian had specially lit an oil lamp. Bai Yu held the copper lamp and leaned over the table, beginning to ask Su Fengnian in detail about the Beiliang border and the distribution of troops within it. He even asked for pen and ink, asking one question and answering the other. A scholar knows the world without leaving the house. This sentence was both correct and incorrect. It was possible to give pointers on the big picture, but it was not enough to support a specific strategy for the time being. This was especially true in Beiliang, where crouching tigers and hidden dragons were hidden. If Bai Yu wanted to have some achievements in military affairs at the border, he had to have a plan in mind. Otherwise, if he blindly showed off in front of Song Dongming, the talented prime minister, or Li Gongda, the old fox of officialdom, he would only be asking for humiliation. Su Fengnian leaned across the table and said softly, After great ancestor Gu entered Beiliang, my master Li Shan had a good talk with him. The two of them finally decided to divide Beiliang into 14 important areas of defense. For example, the Horned Eagle Captain Luo Hongkai is in charge of the troops stationed in one of the 14 areas, so he is also one of the captains in the area. His rank is one level higher than Huang Xiaokuai and the others in Lingzhou. Now, other than the general of a province like Huang Fujin, after the last round of replacements by Qin Shiliang, this new group of captains who hold real power are mostly in their prime. There are even a few who are not even 30 years old. They have been loyal to Beiliang since their father's generation and have great enthusiasm for the border. They cherish the country their fathers have built. Therefore, there are some discussions in the various academies. For example, on the surface, I rely heavily on scholars who go to Liangzhou and give them all the seats in the prefectures and county-level offices. But in reality, there are still some prejudices, favoring favoritism, and paying attention to the bloodline of the generals. I accept these kinds of questions. After all, there is nothing I can do. Bei Mang is at my doorstep. I can only dare to promote these people. After Bai Yu put down his brush, he narrowed his eyes and stared at the map. His finger that was slightly stained with ink slowly brushed across the map. He asked casually, The provisions of the newly built Liuzhou are all under the responsibility of the provincial governor of Lingzhou, Su Beiji. Su Fengnian quickly thought about the hidden meaning behind this question, but he could not figure it out. He nodded and said, Sir, you must have heard of Su Beiji's nickname. Moreover, Beiliang has long begun to buy provisions from the neighboring provinces. To tell you the truth, many of the large families who fled Beiliang out of fear on the surface have the hidden identity of spies from the Fu Shui chamber. In the matter of purchasing provisions, they have contributed greatly. Liang and Yu provinces are self-sufficient, so the matter of Liuzhou's provisions is far from an urgent matter. Su Fengnian smiled. I've thought about it. If the Liang imperial court really refuses to let go of the provisions, Beiliang will openly snatch the provisions. Yes, it should be borrowed. Not to mention the Huainan circuit where Kai Nan's 100,000 troops are stationed, even if it's Qinjibao's Shishu circuit, I would dare to snatch it. With Yin Chongying acting as the middleman, Han Lin, who had formed a tacit understanding with Beiliang, was appointed as the Huainan circuit administrator. This was a piece of good news. With Beiliang playing the role of the good cop, Han Lin wanted to have a clean reputation. He wanted to establish a mighty and loyal image in the imperial court. Beiliang could just give him as much as he wanted. As for the curses from the court, would Su Fengnian care? As for Chen Jibao, didn't you want to go to the Central Plains to pull chestnuts out of the fire? Didn't Xia Guining like to play tricks? Su Yanbing was currently at the southern border of Lingzhou with his junior apprentice brother Han Laozhan, who was appointed as the general of Lingzhou. Without Chen Jibao personally overseeing the situation, it would be difficult for the Shishu Circuit's northern gate to stop Beiliang from borrowing provisions. As for the timing, Su Fengnian trusted Han Laozhan. Bai Yu stared at the vast Liuzhou territory and asked, Yang Yuanzhan is in charge of attacking Beiliang's Calabash Gate, which is a natural stronghold. At the very least, he managed to take down Huagong and Luanhe cities. In the eyes of the Beimang Empress, Lu Gui is more worthy of being entrusted with an important task. However, while he is attacking Liuzhou on the western front, his main army has not moved. He is so idle that Beimang has to invite Tuoba Bodhisattva to enter Liuzhou. Now, Dongjua has no choice but to send his private army to Liuzhou to break the stalemate. This Lu Gui, who is known as half of Beimang's Su Shao, is so weak. Su Fengnian slowly explained, Liuzhou has no danger to rely on. If we want to fight, we can only fight fair and square. This is the case for both sides. In terms of military strength, Lu Gui's army definitely has the absolute advantage. Not to mention his 30,000 private army, the 4 military towns in the tiled gentleman's pavilion in the south of Gusai Prefecture have all mobilized their forces. The few old Longguan nobles of the southern dynasties have also taken out 30,000 infantrymen. Gusai Prefecture has a good relationship with Lu Gui and has also taken out 8,000 Chang tribe light cavalry, a total of 100,000 soldiers. However, the Chang tribe cavalry has been defeated by the Longxiang army. As a result, Lu Gui's army, whose combat strength is already inferior to ours, is in a difficult position. On the ground of Liuzhou, whether or not we can defend Qingcang City is not important. The victory or defeat of the main cavalry force is the key to determining the final outcome. With 40,000 cavalry from various powers, against the 30,000 Longxiang army that can abandon Qingcang City, it is not that our Beiliang is conceited, but indeed, Lu Gui does not dare to make any rash moves. Bai Yu's gaze slowly moved across the map of Liuzhou. Not daring to make any rash moves is the right thing to do. If he does not move, he will be able to deal a fatal blow. Su Fengnian frowned and said, there have been many discussions within the Huayang Pass about how Lu Gui will win by surprise. In order to see the map clearly, the oil lamp in Bai Yu's hand had unknowingly moved too close. His right cheek was burning hot. Without any change in expression, he moved away slightly and nodded. Of course. The 8,000 cavalry of the Chu Protectorate General have completed their objective, and Ko Jianghuai has entered Liuzhou as a general. The Longxiang army already has powerful generals like Prince's younger brother and Li Mofan, Wang Lingbao. In addition, the provincial governor of Liuzhou, Yang Guangdou, and his advisor, Chen Shiliang, are all top-notch talents. There is no need to worry about provisions at the rear. No matter how you look at it, the situation is much better than Liangzhou's Huda City and Yozhou's Huluku. However, I feel that the more this is the case, the more Lu Gui will make a move. Perhaps the reason why Lu Gui, who has the least number of troops on the three fronts of Beimang's southern expedition, can be so patient because he is waiting for Dongzhuo's central front and Yang Yuanzhan's eastern front to fall into a disadvantageous situation. Bai Yu shook his head and said to himself, "No, it's not, perhaps, it's definitely." Su Fengnian was silent. Bai Yu raised his head, his eyes shining. He asked in a deep voice, "If Lu Gui can use the deaths of 60,000 infantry as bait and attack Qingcang City at all costs, deliberately putting his back to the river and even abandoning the disorderly cavalry, only using the Lu cavalry and the elites brought by Tuoba Bodhisattva as the true main force, will the 30,000 Longxiang army not take the bait? Even if the Longxiang army is willing to take the bait, will Ko Jianghuai, who just entered Liuzhou, be able to take it? Once one side enters the battle and falls into the trap, will the other side be able to see the big picture and not help?" Bai Yu looked at Su Fengnian and finally asked, "I want to know if Beimang has received any spy reports similar to the Beimang Empress's anger towards Lu Gui on the Western Front. Is there any news similar to how the important officials of the Southern Dynasty were extremely dissatisfied with the retreat of the Western Front and attacked Lu Gui in the imperial court?" Su Fengnian's heart trembled. Bai Yu put down the oil lamp and said calmly, "Then the prince can do all he can to help Liuzhou." Bai Yu did not speak, and Su Fengnian also did not speak. The room was silent, apart from the occasional sound of the wick bursting. Chapter 1552. Lotus Peak was unprecedentedly grand. It was probably because it had been tainted by Wudang Mountain's mystical aura that people from all walks of life were able to enjoy themselves on the mountain. Under this background, the return journey of Wang Yuanran and his group, who had escaped from the summer town at the foot of the mountain, seemed particularly miserable. Almost all of them were injured. Their departure was even more impressive than when they came. The warmly welcoming Horned Eagle Captain Luo Hongkai sent 100 riders to escort them. During this time, there was also one matter that confused the guests on the mountain. It was said that the children of the Zhongshu province's deputy Zhao Yuling, the Ministry of Appointments' Minister Mao Chen, the new Huainan administrator Han Lin, and the Duke of Yan's children had even alarmed the king of Beiliang to personally come down the mountain to greet them after they arrived at the foot of the mountain. The two sides regretted not having met earlier. The two groups of nobles were treated so differently that it almost made people mistakenly think that a change was about to take place in Liyang. It wasn't until a shocking rumor spread that the number one swordsman in Jingdo, Qi Jiaj, had disappeared into thin air and did not appear in the group leaving the border. He had been replaced by Dongyue Sword Pool's Chai Qingshan. After some careful thought, everyone finally realized that the king of Beiliang was quite sinister. Not only did he secretly act viciously, he also deliberately made those important people unable to eat or sleep in peace. If these words were to spread to the Central Plains, Zhao Yuling and the other central officials would be fine. After all, they were close officials of the emperor and could find an opportunity to talk things out. With the current emperor's wisdom and magnanimity that was not inferior to the previous emperor's, he would certainly not fall for Beiliang's plan to drive a wedge between them. However, Han Lin, who had just left the capital from the position of Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice, was about to suffer. How could those arrogant ruffians of the Huainan Path not use this against him to cause trouble? With this plan in mind, everyone felt more and more sympathy for Yin Chongying and this group of young talents with bright futures. In particular, that group of Gangnam-do scholars all vowed that they would not let Beiliang's shallow tricks succeed. As long as they returned to Jiangnan, they would spare no effort in the literary world to prove the innocence of Yin Chongying, Han Xingyan, and the others. They would prove that these future pillars of the Liang dynasty had been greatly wronged at the foot of Wudang Mountain. Quite a few elegant and famous scholars had already agreed to pay a visit to the newly appointed Huainan Dao administrator on the way back to support him. Assistant Minister Han Xingyan was known for his courage of the world. They could not let such a loyal official suffer setbacks in his territory. Since they were all scholars, even if they had never met Sir Han, they were duty-bound to help him. Sir White Lotus had made 2 new friends on Wudong Mountain. They were the Horned Eagle Captain Luo Hongkai and the second-in-command of the Yuzhou spy, Sui Taizhan. Through his carefree conversation with the 2 of them, he learned about the movements on the mountain and at the foot of the mountain, especially the righteous indignation of the Jiangnan scholars. Bai Yu dismissed this with a smile. At the same time, he sighed deeply. It was not only the little calculations of the elegant scholars, nor was it that Su Fengnian had personally left for Liuzhou to temporarily take over the position of general of Liangzhou that had originally been held by Beiliang's protector general, Chu Lushan. It was more because of the contrast between the two. Beiliang's habitual silence. Even when Sui Taizhan talked about the movements of the scholars of the Central Plains, he only treated it as a joke. Even Luo Hongkai, who had rolled through piles of corpses on the border many times, did not show any resentment or depression in front of Bai Yu. The impression that the 2 of them gave Bai Yu was that Beiliang had a deep-rooted misunderstanding of the Liang imperial court and did not take it seriously at all. Liang, you scold me. You can scold me all you want, I can't be bothered with you. Attack you with a knife. He wanted to, but he would not do it. It seemed that from the Supreme General Su Shao to the new Prince of Liang, Su Fengnian, they were used to venting their anger on the Beimang barbarians and were not willing to lower themselves to the level of those scholars. Of course, if people like Wang Yuanran rushed to Beiliang in a hurry to be reincarnated and looked as if they were asking for a beating, then things would be much simpler. It would be a waste not to beat them up. Moreover, they would not hesitate to beat them up heavily. Bai Yu lived in a secluded hut in the Xiang Palace at the top of the mountain. Different from other distinguished guests who were neighbors, Bai Yu's residence was surrounded by Wudong Taoists. It was a place that a Taoist of the Jing generation had to temporarily leave the mountain to settle some matters. Many Taoists came to visit Mr. White Lotus and ask for advice from Bai Yu. In the end, they were taught a lesson by the Taoist priest, Chen Zhao, and only then did Bai Yu have some peace and quiet. In fact, Bai Yu himself did not dislike this kind of interaction. Bai Yu actually knew that Zhao Ningxin had said that he would ask for forgiveness and cultivate on Wudong Mountain for 10 years. He was curious as to why this mountain had such a secular atmosphere and was also the ancestral court of Taoism, but the Taoists of various generations on the mountain had to help people interpret their fortunes and write letters every 10 years. Especially in the last 100 years, strange Taoists like Huang Manshan, Wang Zhongluo, Hong Shixiang, and Li Yufu had appeared one after another. No one was willing to ascend, and the incense burned more than Mount Longhu. If one did not become an immortal, what was the point of cultivating? Chapter 1553. When Chang Sui, Su Huang, and the others heard that Mr. White Lotus was in Xiang Palace, they also came to visit Bai Yu. Perhaps because it was taboo to talk too much, both sides tacitly only talked about local customs and not military matters. However, Li Dongfang and the little monk Nanbei, who he had met once before, came and gave Bai Yu a big surprise. The little girl carried live chickens and ducks in. Perhaps because they were too tired from the journey, the chickens and ducks were already sickly and had accepted their fate by the time the little girl came in. The little girl said that Taoists of Mount Longhu could also eat meat. She had bought these chickens and ducks in a summer town at the foot of the mountain. She had picked the 2 largest ones to give to Mr. White Lotus to nourish his body. The little girl also thanked Mr. White Lotus for treating them to tea at the Taoist residence back then. Bai Yu didn't know whether to laugh or cry, thinking that this little girl was really nostalgic. During dinner, the little girl personally went to Xiang Palace's kitchen to stew a large pot of chicken for Bai Yu. The little monk Nanbei didn't even dare to eat at the table, squatting by the door and chanting Amit Ba. In the end, Bai Yu hadn't even touched his chopsticks when a woman, led by a little Taoist, angrily came to denounce him. Behind her was a white-robed monk. Bai Yu hurriedly put down his chopsticks and stood up to welcome them. When the woman saw Mr. White Lotus, her expression became better. However, she still muttered in a low voice, "This girl, it's one thing to give a gift, but what kind of silly girl would steal the largest chicken and duck in the house as a gift? She really takes after her father and doesn't know how to manage the house." After the white-robed monk sat down, he motioned for Bai Yu to continue eating. He smiled and said, "I heard that the Wu family's Daoist master is already at the foot of the mountain with the imperial edict. However, they have no intention of climbing the mountain for now. However, with Han Gue and Mr. White Lotus from Green Mountain Monastery, they are bullying this poor monk for fighting alone." Bai Yu suddenly asked an inappropriate question, "Does Mr. know who leader Zhao Go is?" Li Dongfang didn't answer the question. This poor monk is flattered to call Mr. White Lotus, who was personally bestowed by the previous emperor. Bai Yu, who was usually gentle and polite, was aggressive for the first time. Some say it is Yang Tai Sui who died outside the pass. Some say it is the cat man Han Xingxian who died suddenly. Some say it is teacher Lu Hao who was the gatekeeper of Great Peace City. Li Dongxin said straightforwardly, "Chao Zhangqing went to the Tu Zen temple to find me. Even he, Xiaogo's greatest enemy, did not know much." Chao Zhangqing could only guess that it was the imperial tutor who had disappeared without a trace, Yuan Benshi. However, out of the 5 Xiaogo who really did things, Chao Chongqing met 3 of them and killed one of them who was planted in Guangling Path. As for the remaining 4, one of them had taken control of all the northern Qi refinement warriors in the early years. Now, he had no followers. One of them was a person of the Jianghu who controlled everything in the name of the Ministry of Justice. Another replaced the dead one to watch over the movements of Guangling Path. As for the last one, he was shrouded in mystery. I only heard that he was an important chess piece in charge of targeting Beiliang. As for who it was, after Yuan Benshi disappeared without a trace, no one knew. Even His Majesty was no exception. Li Dongfang asked curiously, "Mr. White Lotus, why are you asking this?" Bai Yu smiled and said, "I am going to Mount Qingliang for 2 years. I am afraid I will die there." Li Dongfang frowned and said, "Do you think that person is in Beiliang Palace?" "That is impossible. With Su Shao and Li Shan." Bai Yu shook his head and interrupted, "It might not be someone who has been in hiding for a long time. It might be someone who went later. For example, the assistant administrator of Beiliang, Song Dongming." Li Dongfang rubbed his bald head and said nothing. The monk in white smiled and said, "Regardless of whether Song Dongming is Xiaogo's man or not, Mr. White Lotus' method of using someone else's knife to kill someone is not very good." Bai Yu, who had not eaten much, put down his chopsticks and said with a smile, "One must not have the heart to harm others, but one must always have the heart to guard against others. As for Song Dongming's identity, I am just guessing. But since I have made up my mind to live in Beiliang for 2 years, I have to use some dirty tricks. To tell the truth, even if Mr. did not come today, I would have gone to find Mr. tomorrow and asked Mr. to go with me to Mount Qingliang." Therefore, Bai Yu ate Miss Dongming's meal with a guilty conscience. "If it were not for the fact that I was really hungry, I would not have even touched the chopsticks." The monk in white said to himself, "If Xiaogo's leader really is Yuan Benshi, then Prime Minister Song Dongming, who was favored and then abandoned, may really be Xiaogo's man. But at the same time, if the two are both Xiaogo's men, Song Dongming may be completely loyal to Beiliang." Bai Yu nodded and said, "The Emperor of Liyang did not kill half-inch tongue Yuan Benshi simply because he had outlived his usefulness. Naturally, he was wary of Yuan Benshi's Xiaogo power. After the previous emperor died, Yuan Benshi was too unpredictable for the current emperor. Compared to the Beiliang cavalry's thunderous snoring at the door, Yuan Benshi was like the sound of breathing by the side of the bed. Even though it was very light, it made it harder for people to sleep. Yang Taisui is dead, Lu Haoshi is dead, Han Xingxian is dead, Xie Guining is gone. Who in Great Peace City can keep Mr. Yuan in check, who can be on equal footing with the previous emperor? Speaking of which, if Yin Mao Chen or someone else is Yuan Benqi's final choice for prime minister, then Song Dongming can only be the shadow minister. Even if Song Dongming is disheartened by Yuan Benqi's death, but I'm afraid. Li Yang felt a headache coming on. He ate quickly and didn't listen to these troublesome matters. The woman ladled a bowl of white rice for the little monk and put some vegetables on the tip of the rice. The little monk squatted at the door and ate. The monk in white looked at this Mr. White Lotus and said with a smile, "Seeing is believing." Bai Yu said self-deprecatingly, "I must have disappointed Mr. Li Yang sighed and looked down at the table full of food. Beiliang has the aura of a palace. It looks, smells, and looks good, but it doesn't taste good. It seems that there is no taste in being the emperor. No wonder that boy's surnamed Su." Li Yang suddenly slapped his chopsticks. "Father, you can nag people all you want, but I made all this food." The monk in white immediately had his wife get another set of chopsticks and bowls. He gave a thumbs up before eating. Delicious. Chapter 1554. As the sun set in the west, Transverse Water City, the northernmost city of Ji Province, was about to close its gates. Red lanterns were being prepared to be hung on the city walls. Right at this moment, a cavalry scout drenched in blood galloped over. When the soldiers on the city walls saw the scout's face clearly, they shouted at the top of their lungs to have the half-closed city gates rise again. The scout with 2 arrows stuck in his back rushed in and shouted with all his might, "Urgent enemy report. Bai Mang's army is attacking." Not long after, smoke signals were lit within Transverse Water City as a warning to the neighboring Silver Sparrow City. The smoke billowed. It was actually 50,000 Bai Mang cavalry. Very quickly, the beacon towers to the south of Transverse Water City and Silver Sparrow City were lit one after another. In less than an hour, the entire northern part of Ji Province knew of the shocking news of 50,000 Bai Mang cavalry invading the south. The newly appointed garrison general of Transverse Water City was a fat, middle-aged man. His surname was Gao, and his given name was Ying. This man had been a prominent member of Ji Province since the time of Northern Han. He was one of Ji Province's foot soldiers under Grand General Yang Xinqing, and a significant portion of his soldiers came from the Gao family of Ji Province. Gao Ying didn't even have time to put on his armor. Surrounded by his personal guards and retainers, he hastily arrived at the top of Transverse Water City, his face pale. It wasn't that Gao Ying didn't want to run, but rather, according to the reports from the scouts, Bai Mang's vanguard cavalry was already within reach. In addition, a large number of horse fences were circling the city south to block his path. Gao Ying's teeth chattered. He was truly regretful. He originally thought that after Wei Jingtang's death, Ji Province's General Yuan Tingshan, who had the 7,000 to 8,000 personal cavalry from Lijian Castle, had won several battles here in succession. In addition, the Great Pillar of Liaodong, Gu Jiantang, had also received frequent reports of success. Gao Ying reckoned that since the Bai Mang barbarians were having a hard time fighting Beiliang, they wouldn't send troops to Ji Province to take advantage of him. As a result, he had spent 300,000 taels of silver to establish relations with General Yuan and the capital. Relying on his relationship with Yang Xinqing, he was able to snatch the position of garrison general of Transverse Water City from the son of an aristocratic family in the capital. Currently, there were 5,000 garrison soldiers in the city. However, in Ji Province, it was even harder to find a general who didn't want to take an empty salary than a 3-legged toad. However, with Yuan Tingshan keeping an eye on them, their table manners were much better. Most of them only dared to take 10 to 20% of the empty salary, or at most 30%. However, Gao Ying wasn't the legitimate son of the main branch. He had spent 300,000 taels of his second branch's private savings to become an official. Therefore, the actual military strength in Transverse Water City was less than 3,000. Furthermore, they were all inexperienced soldiers transferred from southern Ji province. However, could Gaoying be blamed for this? Although the archers from northern Ji province were more familiar with bows and horses, they were also more expensive. A single archer from northern Ji province was equivalent to 2 of the southern Ji province's infantry who were known as the unrivaled beneath the heavens a few years ago. The old foundation of Ji province had been taken away by Yangshanxing. In the end, they suffered a great defeat at Guangling Pass. Now, even the elite southern Ji province's infantry, whose combat strength was only slightly inferior, were under Yuan Tingshan's control. If Gaoying wanted to earn back his capital in 3 years, other than putting up a show in Transverse Water City, what else could he do? Gaoying turned his head and looked at Silver Sparrow City. The garrison general, Wei Quanshao, had a similar character as him. He had just bought the official hat and had not even gotten used to it yet. When they were young, both of them were a pair of scoundrels who indulged in debauchery. In the past, they were even called the 4 young masters of Ji province. It was said that Wei Quanshao's Silver Sparrow City was almost emptied out, and all of them were sold at a low price to a few powerful armies in northern Ji province. 2 days ago, when Wei Quanshao invited him to Silver Sparrow City to drink with prostitutes, Wei Quanshao, who was a bastard who only cared about money, actually spent a fortune to invite 2 popular courtesans from the city to drink with him. When both of them were having sex on a big bed and 2 rouge horses, Wei Quanshao even suggested this to Gaoying. It was said that money could be earned very quickly. With 50 carriages fully loaded with bows, armor, and spears, one could earn at least 10,000 taels of silver, and it was guaranteed that the journey would be smooth and unimpeded. Gaoying was puzzled at that time. Although the general of Ji province, Yuan Tingshan, did not manage the border affairs well, he had always been very strict. Wei Quanshao laughed and scolded him for being a pig-headed man. With his thick fingers, he wrote the surnames of the 2 patrons on the back of the courtesan, Li and Han. Gaoying immediately understood what was going on. It was the Li family of Wild Goose Castle who was on the same side as Yuan Tingshan. And the Han family of Valiant Bravery, who was once exterminated, and the Han family of Valiant Bravery, who had made a comeback. One of them had the support of the Great Pillar State, who was in charge of the military affairs of the 2 Liao provinces, and the other one was the Deputy General of Ji province, Han Fang, who was promoted by the emperor without restraint. Gaoying and Wei Quanshao knew nothing about managing an army, but under the influence of their families, they could not be too bad as officials. No matter how many military achievements Yuan Tingshan had, he could only be the general of Ji province at the border. Otherwise, if his father-in-law was already in charge of the 2 Liao provinces, and his son-in-law was not enough to manage just one Ji province, how could he manage the whole river province? Therefore, he needed the only son of the Han family in Ji province to keep him in check. No matter how much the emperor rewarded him, no matter how much military power he gave him, his foundation was still shallow. For the next 5 years, the deputy general of Ji province, Han Fang, would still be a trusted general at the border. Before he could see him, he could hear his voice. Gaoying felt like the entire city wall was shaking. With the help of the last remaining light, at the end of Gaoying's vision, a black line suddenly appeared on the horizon. Gaoying's heart was like dead ashes. The Ji North defense line was completely finished. This fatty who originally came to Horizontal Water City to eat empty pay didn't seem to have the time to earn any money from smuggling at the border. Gaoying looked around in a daze. Apart from the personal retainers he brought from Gao family, the other guards on the city wall were all young and immature. He heard that in northern Ji province, as long as they wore armor and held a spear in the city, they would be able to obtain a decent salary. Then, they all came to Horizontal Water City. They didn't even know that the previous general, Wei Jingtang, the former Grand Secretary Zhang Julu's student, was once forced to leave the city to fight against Beimang's cavalry. 800 horizontal water cavalry and 4,000 elite infantrymen all died in one battle. They also didn't know that even earlier, the 10,000 Yuzhou cavalry that quietly crossed 1,000 li to ambush Bei Mang was already here. This horizontal water city actually wasn't peaceful at all. Many of Horizontal Water City's soldiers still held on to a fluke, naively believing that the majestic Bei Mang cavalry was only here to show off their strength, that perhaps Ji Province's General Yuan Tingshan would soon lead his army to defeat the enemy in one fell swoop, or that the Great Pillar State Gu Jiantang was currently leading troops over from Liaodong. In one go, Wang Sui gathered 50,000 elite cavalry from Bei Mang's eastern border army. Qiu Zhemo Great Ru Zhishui and Dong Zhemo Great Wang Jingchong each had 10,000 cavalry, as well as 3 young generals who braced themselves and ignored the tactful advice of the 2 Bei Mang great generals. 50,000 men, compared to Bei Mang's eastern border army that was gradually increasing from the biting grasslands to nearly 300,000, didn't seem like a serious injury. However, in deciding the direction of a large-scale war, the number of people was important, but it wasn't absolute. Bei Mang's newly appointed eastern border commander Wang Sui took away 50,000 elite soldiers, pretty much the same as taking away half of the eastern border's essence energy. The 2 generals on the eastern border who were comparable in seniority to Lu Gui and Yang Yuanzhan, 1, their authority was lower than Wang Sui's, 2, the 2 of them couldn't control the 3 grassland-born generals at all, let alone Great Ru Zhishui and Wang Jingchong, these type of children of influential families. They could only watch as these 50,000 people ran to Ji Province. If this was the Liang dynasty, this was naturally something unimaginable. Great Ru Zhishui was riding on an ink-colored steed from the grassland. He raised his head and looked at the outline of Horizontal Water City. With a ferocious smile on his face, he said, "Once we enter the city, we can still have dinner." There was still some distance before they could launch their assault. Wang Jingchong didn't ride his steed to join his personal army of 10,000 soldiers. Instead, he stood beside Wang Sui with Qiu Zhemo on his left and right. He frowned and said, "According to the spy, both Generals Gao Ying, Wei Quanshao, and Wei Quanshao are good-for-nothings. But, if they fight with their lives on the line, it will be disadvantageous for us to fight at night. Furthermore, all 50,000 soldiers are cavalry. Although they can dismount and fight, they don't have any siege weapons. Can we really take down these 2 important towns in Ji Province so easily?" Chapter 1555. Wang Sui sneered and said, "When leading troops to war, other than paying attention to the changes on the battlefield, you also have to pay attention to the situation outside the battlefield. When you have the chance to go to the Central Plains in the future, it will be even more so." Wang Jingchong, why do you think Yuan Tingshan would let 2 idiots guard Horizontal Water Silver Hawk? Is it because he doesn't have any spare troops? Even if we take a step back, Li Jiayan Castle, which is on the same line as him, has 8,000 private cavalry. Their cavalry battle isn't weak, so what problem can they have in defending the city? Isn't this clearly giving way to us? Otherwise, if we continue to win battles, how long do you think he will be the general of Jizhou? The Guangling Road War is so unbearable. If an imperial edict is sent to the general's mansion of Jizhou, the imperial court wants him to be the general of the southern expedition, Lu Xingxiang, will he dare to say no? Even if he dares, that kid's father-in-law will be the first to take care of him. Great Ru Shiwei said impatiently, "I don't believe that Gao Ying and Wei Quanshao have the courage and insight of Wei Jingtang, and don't have the ability of Wei Jingtang. After taking down the 2 cities, whether we go south to Jizhou, west to Hezhou, or finally back to the east, we will have great prospects. General, just give the order to attack the city. Wang Jingchong shouldn't fight with me for the merit of Horizontal Water City." Wang Sui sneered and said, "Attack the city. Attack my ass. If you want to die in battle, die in Yuzhou." Great Ru Shiwei was stunned. "What do we do there?" Wang Sui looked at the border city shrouded in twilight and said, "Tell them that if they surrender, we won't kill them. Give them an hour to think about it. Also, we only want the food and armor in the city. As for the people, as long as they are willing to take off their armor and leave Horizontal Water City empty-handed, we will let them go. Great Ru Shiwei muttered, boring. Wang Sui turned to Wang Jingchong and said, go and tell those 3 brutes that Horizontal Water City will belong to you and Great Ru Shiwei. Silver Hawk City will belong to the 3 of them. Wang Jingchong nodded and was about to leave when he heard Wang Sui say indifferently, when the soldiers of the 2 cities retreat to the south, it will be up to the 5 of you how to earn merits. Remember, leave some alive to pass the message to Yuan Tingshan, so that Ji province will know that we are heading south. After that, according to the arrangement, Horizontal Water and Silver Harrier cities will each leave 3,000 soldiers behind to guard their cities. The rest will follow me to River Province. After Wang Jingchong left, Wang Sui asked with a smile, Lord Chiu Gemo, I heard that you want to have dinner with us. Great Ru Shiwei, whose eyes were burning with passion, chuckled and said, there are 2,000 to 3,000 people in Horizontal Water City. It's barely enough for me and my children to have a meal. It's not enough to fill our stomachs, but it's enough to keep us from being hungry for a while. Wang Sui was expressionless. He raised his head and silently looked at the Horizontal Water City that had resisted countless grassland cavalry since it was built. At the end of the summer of the first year of Xiangfu, Hingshui and Yinyao fell into the hands of Beimang. It was rumored that Beimang's main force on the eastern front was going to bypass the Tuliao defense lines and use Jizhou as a breakthrough point to invade the south. Everyone in Liang was shocked. Not long after the newly appointed Huainan Dao administrator Han Lin took up his post, he was given the title of Grand Secretary of the Imperial Court. Huainan Dao Jidushi Kai Nan was given the title of Primary Grade 2 West Protecting General. Jizhou General Yuan Tingshan was given the title of Primary Grade 3 West Protecting General. Jizhou Deputy General Han Fong was given the power to expand by 10,000 troops. Along with this imperial edict, there was another secret edict delivered personally by Song Tonglu, the chief eunuch of the ceremony directorate. The Battle of Jizhou had to be limited to Jizhou North. The sound of the bugle horn rang out across the vast land around Qingsang City. Liuzhou finally welcomed the first battle that involved almost all of the troops on the western front. The 30,000 infantrymen of the Longguan nobles were the main force of the siege. They slowly spread out and attacked Qingsang City. The cavalry of the 4 towns within the tiled gentleman's pavilion protected the south of the infantrymen, facing off against the Longxiang army. The commander of the western front, Lu Gui, sat on the back of his horse, personally supervising the siege. Behind him were the 30,000 Lu family troops and the 10,000 personal guards that Tuoba Bodhisattva brought. A noble general from Longguan didn't care about the success of the siege at all. From time to time, he would turn his head to look at the large group of northern Liang black-armored soldiers 3 li away. Could the cavalry of the 4 towns of Gusai Prefecture really block the charge of the Longxiang army? If the Longxiang army broke through their cavalry formation and even the infantrymen attacking the city, they would only need 2 rounds and there would be no need to fight this battle. Did he have to give the Beiliang the biggest victory since the Battle of Liangmang? Did General Lu not understand that the Battle of Liuzhou was not just about a small Qingsang city? Was it worth the risk of the entire western front to take down Qingsang City? He finally could not hold it in anymore. He rode his horse to Lu Gui's side. Just as he was about to speak, Lu Gui coldly said, I have already made up my mind. There is no need to say anything more. This Beimang general with a good background was also angered. However, he still suppressed his anger and tried to speak calmly to this old man who was highly regarded by the emperor. Great general, to split up the cavalry formation like this is too risky. It is not difficult to take down a small Qingsang city. Even if we hide 20,000, no, even 10,000 heavy armored infantrymen among the 30,000 infantrymen waiting for the Longxiang army to charge, it is still fine. To stake everything on one throw and underestimate the strength of the Beiliang cavalry formation, great general, this is not right. Lu Gui did not say anything. This general finally said angrily, Great General, you are treating the lives of 30,000 Longguan soldiers as a joke just for your own position. Currently, there were undercurrents in the western capital of the Southern Dynasty. The generals of the Western Front who came from the Southern Dynasty naturally heard about it. Saying that Lu Gui did not live up to his name was already being polite. Those who were not polite would directly request for the emperor to change the commander. Even the candidates were very clear. Other than Tuoba Bodhisattva, who was already at the border of Liuzhou, even Zhong Tan, who shone brilliantly at the eastern front of Huluku, was brought out. If it was said that the military god Tuoba Bodhisattva was pushed out, it was still acceptable. However, to use Zhong Tan was simply slapping Lu Gui's old face. How long had Zhong Tan been in the army? How long had the great general Lu Gui been in the army? The king of the old southern court, Huang Songpu, had returned after his retirement and replaced the useless Lu Gui as the commander of the Western Front. There was no doubt that he had the most support in the Southern Dynasty. Therefore, the Eastern Front army that had been stationed in Liuzhou for a long time had all sorts of rumors circulating. At this moment, the general's expression changed drastically. A horse slowly approached. The man wearing light armor on the horse's back said in a deep voice, "Scram back to the battle formation." The general swallowed his saliva and turned his horse back to the infantry formation without another word. Lu Gui looked at the person who came and asked with a smile, "King of the Northern Court, do you think that the Longxiang army will dare to take the bait? 30,000 infantry soldiers who are at the mercy of others and the cavalry of the 4 towns who are not strong enough. The bait is big enough." The person who came was Tuoba Bodhisattva. He glanced at Qingsang City and said, "Wang Lingbao might not be able to see through the great general's intentions, but Li Mofan, who is also the deputy general of the Longxiang army, will most likely be able to see through it. It's just that Yang Guangdou and Chen Shiliang are in that city. If Li Mofan is smart enough, he will also take advantage of the situation. Otherwise, he can forget about being promoted in the Beiliang Frontier Army. Even if Li Mofan is cold enough, as long as the Longxiang army is in a stalemate, Li Mofan can't just stand by and watch them die. I believe that he isn't that cold-hearted." Lu Gui chuckled and said, "On the surface, I, an old fellow whose position is in danger, need to try anything. Beiliang's Hudi City and Xiaoguang City are fighting fiercely on 2 fronts. Lu Province also needs a great victory to raise the morale of the people, so the time has come for both sides." Lu Gui restrained his smile and said, "Speaking of which, if it weren't for the king of the Northern Court's 20,000 soldiers rushing over, even if I, Lu Gui, lost my position, I still wouldn't have fought this battle. In Lu Province, if I can't take down the entire Longxiang army in one go, small fights are meaningless. The Battle of Liangmang was originally going to be won in Lu Province. Now, it's just going around in a big circle." Tuoba Bodhisattva hesitated and said in a low voice, "After this battle, General, you will most likely be summoned back to the Southern Court." Lu Gui smiled and said, "It's fine. Just treat it as making space for Fatty Dong on the central line." Tuoba Bodhisattva chuckled and said, "General Lu, don't worry. In the future, you and I will enter the Central Plains hand in hand." Lu Gui nodded. The old man sighed and said, "I feel sorry for these brave men of the Southern Court. They came from the desert, but in the end, they died in the desert. They didn't even get to see the prosperity of the Central Plains, even a glimpse would have been good." PS1, yesterday, writing that ancestor Gu and Li Shan met was a slip of the pen. PS2, every Alliance Master will be given a set of physical books in the snow. I definitely didn't forget this. When the books are finished, they will be given out together with a signature. However, they won't sign every book. They will only sign one book, but they will write a message. As for what to write, the Alliance Master can suggest it in the book review section. Chapter 1556. In a military camp of Yuzhou province less than 200 miles away from the mouth of the gourd, a thin, one-eyed old general slowly walked onto the reviewing platform. Before the old man showed up, Chen Yinshui, the deputy commander of the infantry of Beiliang province, Wang Fuji, the general of Yuzhou province, and Hu Kuei, the provincial governor of Yuzhou province, were already standing on the platform. The old man then walked to the center of the platform. Strangely, even laymen who were not familiar with the army of Yuzhou province would consider it reasonable for the old man to be the head of the army. Standing there with his hands on his saber, the old general in iron armor remained silent for a long time as he watched those officers and soldiers who remained still under the hot sun. The old man remained silent as if he wanted to look over all the tens of thousands of infantrymen who were going to set out for the battle and identify all the flags of the old camp of the infantry of Yuzhou province. With a gloomy look, the old general finally opened his mouth slowly. The general has passed away. The Lord is not in Yuzhou province. Even if I, Yan Wenluan, don't die on the battlefield, I don't have many years left. Therefore, I would like to take this opportunity to say something that I've been hiding for almost 2 decades. The old general picked up his saber and pointed at Chen Yinshui, the deputy commander of the infantry of Beiliang province, on his side. Old Chen, you must know our deputy commander. I remember that this guy accompanied me to drink in Lord Qingliang's mansion 16 years ago. At that time, Chen Yinshui was just a class 3 general. The general joked that it was a waste of talent for you to lead 40,000 to 50,000 infantrymen in Yuzhou province. Why not go to the border of Liangzhou province and give you 30,000 cavalries? Yan Wenluan didn't look at her best friend who had known her for most of her life. She just pointed at the embarrassed Chen Yinshui with the cold knife. This old bastard can't hold his liquor, and his behavior is even worse when he's drunk. He was pretending to be drunk at that time, but as soon as the general said that, he immediately stood up. His eyes were so bright. Guess what the deputy commander of the infantry of Beiliang said? He said, "Do it." Why didn't he do it? Of course, the general didn't succeed in poaching him. Why? Did Chen Yinshui regret? No, Yan Wenluan, was too anxious and almost fought with the great general. I still remember clearly what I said at the time. As soon as I smashed my wine cup, I stood up and told the Grand General that Beiliang's infantry only had this much strength. For the past 2 years, the Liangzhou cavalry had swindled and stolen so many of them. They had picked out most of the old ones, and even some of the young ones weren't spared. How could I, Yan Wenluan, still be the commander of Beiliang's infantry? It's not impossible for Chen Yinshui to join the cavalry of Liangzhou province. However, you have to throw Yuan Zuozong, Chu Lushan, and Qi Danggua into our Beiliang infantry. The veteran General Chen Yun lowered his head as if he had turned a deaf ear to Yan Wenluan's words. However, he probably wanted to dig a hole and hide in it after being exposed so mercilessly by Yan Wenluan. Yan Wenluan then pointed at Yuzhou's provincial governor Hu Kuei with the cold knife. This provincial governor is the founder of our Beiliang's crossbowmen. He is the most legitimate cavalry general. When Lord Hu replaced Wang Peifang as the provincial governor of Yuzhou, he came to me, Yan Wenluan, to establish a relationship with me. According to the rules of the officialdom, he said some polite words to an old man like me. Then, I asked him a question. How did he feel about being an official in Yuzhou, which had fewer warhorses than Lingzhou a few years ago? Provincial governor who is an honest man, so he told me honestly that he felt quite sullen. He said that he thought he had a chance to be Lu Jin's assistant in Huda city. Otherwise, he could have gone to Liuzhou's Longxiang army to work with his old subordinate Li Mofan and Wang Lingbao. That's not bad either. Yan Wenluan leaned on the knife with both hands again and looked at the more than 10,000 infantry soldiers. Our Beiliang has 300,000 border soldiers. Therefore, in Liang, I've always heard that Beiliang's 300,000 iron cavalry are the best in the world. I found it strange. Beiliang's cavalry has never made up more than half of the border army. How did it become 300,000 iron cavalry? Does Liang think that our Beiliang infantry doesn't exist? It seems like Beiliang doesn't take our infantry seriously either. The one-eyed old general tilted his chin to the east and sneered, "There's a fellow in Jizhou named Yang Shenxing. He's the idiot who was later toyed with by a few youngsters at the Guangling Road. Back then, he wasn't even fit to carry my shoes. Under his command are tens of thousands of infantry soldiers left behind by the old Northern Han. They've come up with the nickname Southern Ji Infantry. Afterwards, for the past decade or so, they've been called the unrivaled in the world in all of Liang. In addition, there's also the Wufeng army led by Wang Tongshan, the #1 general under the command of the King of Yan from the southern border, and Wu Zhongshuan's Dejia. Their reputations aren't small." The old man paused for a moment. "If that's all, Yan Wenluan, can tolerate it. After all, we can't go to Jizhou or Nanjiang to fight with them. Besides, we northern Liang people are not good at talking. However, let's not talk about Beiliang. Let's talk about our Beiliang. Let's not talk about Liangzhou, Lingzhou, or even Liuzhou. Let's talk about our Yuzhou. In Luanhe City, our infantry battalion was stripped of its battalion number. Who was it that crossed Hezhou and entered Jizhou, and in the end, at the mouth of the gourd, reduced 10,000 soldiers to only 3,000? We traveled 1,000 li, fought a series of battles to the death, and killed nearly 30,000 enemies. We almost completely paralyzed the Beimang barbarians' eastern supply line." Yan Wenluan mocked himself. "What? Do you think that our Yuzhou army also has heroes?" Yan Wenluan laughed, "Of course. However, it's a pity that the no-retreat battalion of 3,400 soldiers is Yuzhou's 1st Cavalry Battalion. The prince who fought alongside the 10,000 Yuzhou cavalry is an ordinary soldier in the no-retreat battalion in name. It has nothing to do with you, a bunch of pitiful creatures who don't have warhorses and only have 2 legs." The old man's face turned ferocious. "Let's not talk about Yul Wandao, the deputy general of Yuzhou cavalry, or Shi Yulu and Fan Wenyao, who were promoted to general of Vao cavalry and general of Agile cavalry. Let's talk about Tianheng, the newly appointed chief general of 30,000 Yuzhou cavalry." At that time, this old man despised the prince for not daring to fight to the death, and even said that the prince had used up all his courage after resisting the imperial decree. Therefore, he had long retired and returned to his farm. That was why Yul Wandao was appointed as the deputy general of 10,000 Yuzhou cavalry. Tianheng, a bastard who never went to Ji Bei or outside the mouth of the gourd, is the only one who dares to slap his chest and say, "Old Yan, don't worry, Tianheng, promise you that I'll create another cavalry battalion for you." The old man placed the cold saber on his waist again and rubbed his cheeks. He took a few steps forward and asked with a deep voice, "Since when did the Yuzhou infantry fall to such a state?" The entire place was silent, but everyone's eyes were red. Yan Wenluan pointed at herself and said, "Ever since I, Yan Wenluan, joined the Su family's army, I've been following the great general for 36 years. From the very first day, I was a foot soldier, and today, I'm a major second-grade general. In the end, I'm just an old foot soldier. I don't dare to say that I'm the leader of the entire Beiliang infantry, but I, Yan Wenluan, am the one who raised all your Yuzhou infantry." The one-eyed old man casually pointed in the direction of Xiaoguang city behind him and said, "Over there, and to the north, you'll see the Beimang barbarians. They claim to have an army of 200,000. Both Crouching Bao City and Luanhe City are gone, and the Beimang barbarians say that Xiaoguang City will fall soon." The old man turned around and said, "But I, Yan Wenluan, will not agree to it." At the northern border of Yuzhou and River Province, a huge scarlet flag was flapping in the wind. The chief general of Yuzhou cavalry, Tianheng, his deputy general, Yul Wandao, general of Vao cavalry, Shi Yulu, and general of Agile cavalry, Fan Wenyao, were all riding their warhorses in a line. Behind them were 30,000 light cavalrymen from Yuzhou. The old general, Tianheng, had a simple appearance. He didn't look like a general with great power. If he wasn't wearing armor, he would look more like an old farmer. At that time, this old man was resentful of the young vassal king's inaction. In a fit of anger, he resigned from his post and returned to his hometown. He used the excuse that he was old and his body couldn't withstand the torment, so he could go home and play with his grandchildren. Only then did Yul Wandao have the chance to lead an army to Ji-Bei. But in fact, the entire Yuzhou knew that the old general had no children. They had all died outside the pass. Later on, Su Fengnian and Yul Wandao appeared outside the mouth of the gorge together. Out of the 10,000 cavalrymen, only 3,000 of them returned. When the old men, whose experience was not much inferior to Yan Wenluan, Chen Yunshui, and the others, heard the news, they rushed to Yan Wenluan's tent that very night. Tian Heng was waiting outside. Even when the Huayang Pass Protectorate issued an order to restore Tian Heng's status as a general, Yan Wenluan still refused to accept it. In the end, Su Fengnian was forced to write a letter to Yan Wenluan personally. Only then did Yuzhou reluctantly admit Tian Heng as the chief general of Yuzhou cavalry. The old man pressed the hilt of his saber with one hand and turned to Yul Wandao with a laugh. Old Yan must be furious with me this time. But you can't blame me for this. This guy didn't even care about our friendship for half a lifetime and refused to see me. Chapter 1557. Yul Wandao and the others smiled knowingly. Tian Heng and Great General Yan Wenluan were old brothers who had exchanged their lives for each other. In the early years, one of them was a captain of the infantry, while the other was a captain of the cavalry. In order to save Yan Wenluan, who was trapped in the enemy formation, Tian Heng disobeyed orders and took the initiative to rescue him. In the Great General's rage, Tian Heng was demoted from a captain to an ordinary cavalryman. In the fierce competition in the Su family's army, Tian Heng was one step behind. Those of the younger generation, such as Su Pu, Wang Fei's brother Wu Qi, Yuan Zuozong, and Hu Kuei, had all surpassed Tian Heng at that time to become the leading general of the cavalry. By the time the Su family died, Tian Heng had only become a fourth-rank general. It was only when Yan Wenluan personally asked the great general for him that Tian Heng was promoted to a rank and moved from Liangzhou to Yuzhou. However, after more than 10 years, compared to the likes of Wei Taizhan who had retired from high positions and returned home with glory, or the current deputy commander Jean Partridge Zhou Kong, Tian Heng could be considered an extremely depressed veteran of the Beiliang army. Tian Heng stopped smiling and said to Yul Wandao, General Yu, Beimang's 50,000 elite cavalrymen on the eastern front said they were going to attack Ji province, but we all know that these barbarians are heading straight for Yuzhou. They want to cooperate with Yang Yuanzhan at the mouth of the gorge to take down Xiaoguang city and invade Yuzhou. Our original plan was for you and me to split into two groups. One group would intercept those 50,000 at the border of the River of Spirits, while the other group would continue north along the outer edge of the mouth of the gorge. Before we set out, we said that you and Shi Yulu would lead 15,000 cavalrymen here to wait for the Beimang army, while Fan Wenyao and I would lead 15,000 cavalrymen north, with General Yu's no-retreat camp as the vanguard. But I thought... Yul Wandao interrupted with a smile, General, no buts. Since we agreed to use the troops this way, there's no reason to change it at the last minute. Tian Heng glared. Yozhou's 30,000 cavalrymen. Am I, Tian Heng, the leading general, or are you, Yul Wandao, the leading general? Compared to the scholarly Fan Wenyao, the new Beiliang's first general, Shi Yulu, had a rougher temperament. Yul Wandao felt somewhat helpless. Tian Heng looked at the wind and sand in the distance and said, although our superiors didn't say it clearly, Lu province is facing such a great crisis. Even His Highness has gone there in person. All the other garrisons in Beiliang also followed His Highness to Lu province. Therefore, it's definitely not simple for our Yuzhou cavalry to do the opposite at this critical moment. In Fan Wenyao's words, it's a great scheme. Beimang has 50,000 elite cavalry. Not to mention Dong Yue's consort old Wang Sui, the Qiu and Dong generals on the eastern front are not simple either. Tianheng suddenly laughed. You Wandao, don't think that you can look down on me just because you won 2 great battles in Jizhou and Heluku. When I picked up the first-generation Su family saber, you were still drinking milk. Shi Yulu was brought to the position of general of cavalry by the old General Tianheng, so he did not have any taboos in his speech. He joked, "Old General, you can't say that. Although General Yu is young, he is not careless at all in war, unlike you." Tianheng suddenly raised his voice. Shi Yulu hurriedly swallowed the word inferior and laughed. "Not as good as you, old General." Tianheng snorted coldly, but there was a smile in his eyes, then it settled. "Yu Wandao, Shi Yulu, and Fan Wenyao, you 3 will take 20,000 men and go out of Heluku. I will take 10,000 men to guard here. I don't expect to defeat the enemy cavalry, but I want to delay them from entering Yuzhou." Fan Wenyao frowned. He wanted to say something but stopped. He gave Shi Yulu a look. The latter understood and whispered, "Old General, you can't change the marching strategy so carelessly." Tianheng waved his hand. "The mouth of the gourd is the most important. Whether or not we can catch the turtle in the jar will depend on whether your 20,000 cavalry can hold on to the mouth of the pocket." Although the Huaiyang Pass Protectorate had only sent a secret military order to the Yuzhou cavalry, everyone present could guess the truth. Although they were shocked, who wouldn't feel their blood boiling? If your Beimang Dongzhuo wants to use Liuzhou as a breakthrough point, then our Beiliang cavalry will wipe out your eastern Heluku army in one fell swoop. Gazing at these faces that were far younger than his, Tianheng softly said, "We're all on the same side, so I won't beat around the bush." Of the 30,000 Yuzhou cavalry, most of them were young people. Why is that? Because after fighting Wang Sui's army to the death and surviving, even if they have military merits, they won't be great and definitely can't compare to going to Heluku. It's enough for me, Tianheng, to be a third-ranked general in this life. When I joined the army, I didn't have the spirit of a scholar like you, Yu Wandao. Back then, I wanted my whole family to starve to death. I really couldn't live anymore, so I tied my head to my belt and joined the army. How could I have imagined that I would become a general one day? Who would have thought? Tianheng laughed happily. "Don't talk nonsense with me. Don't you know what kind of temper I, Tianheng, have? Don't talk about old Yen not being able to change my mind. Back then, even in front of the great general, I would still act as I should." At this time, a group of scouts galloped over. It was a group led by Commandant Fan Fun. The rider riding alongside Fan Fun was actually a child. There were 2 disproportionate Beiliang sabers hanging from his waist. He stood on the horse's back with his hands tucked into his sleeves, looking very much like an expert. Fan Fan reported to the generals that there was no sign of Beimang horses within 50 li of them. Tianheng called out to the scout who was about to turn around and head north. He smiled at the child and asked, "Are you the little general of our Yuzhou cavalry, Fong Long? I heard that you alone killed several hundred Beimang barbarians outside Heluku." The child nodded with a straight face. Fan Fan couldn't help but say, "General Tian, this child is actually thin-skinned in front of outsiders. Didn't he just ask me if he could become an official scout after paying off his debt and making a meritorious service? This child has 2 cold sabers. One was given to him by someone else, and the other was temporarily lent to him by us. Isn't he thinking that he can legitimately have a second cold saber?" Tianheng laughed heartily. "From now on, you are the corporal of the 8th Yuzhou Cavalry." Yu Dilong asked, "Does your words matter?" "My master said that I have to follow the rules. Otherwise, he won't let me stay in Yuzhou." Tianheng was suddenly speechless and somewhat embarrassed. He dared to act shamelessly in front of Yan Wenluan, who was his sworn friend, but he really didn't dare to play dumb with that young prince. Yu Wandao smiled and helped him out. General Tian's words are effective in all military affairs of the Yuzhou cavalry. And don't forget, your master is still an ordinary soldier of no retreat battalion. So even without General Tian's words, I, Yu Wandao, as the commanding officer of no retreat battalion, and you, Yu Dilong, as the corporal of the 8th Yuzhou cavalry, will still be effective. The child standing on horseback clenched the cold saber at his waist and said seriously, Generals, please be at ease. I will definitely kill more enemies this time than last time. Tianheng smiled and waved his hand. The child and the scout captain, Fan Fun, and the others rode away. Then Tianheng said to the three sternly, I, Tianheng, am an old man who fought his way out of the spring and autumn war. My strength is not as strong as it was back then, so Bailiang will depend on you in the future. Tianheng lowered his head and looked at the 6th-generation Su family saber at his waist. After looking up, he suddenly said, General Yu, I didn't leave anything behind in my life, just a run-down house that isn't worth much. But there are still 5 sabers at home. Then I'll leave them to you, Yu Wandao, to keep them for me. If you have the chance in the future, tell the younger generation about the story of that Yuzhou veteran. How about it? Yu Wandao, Shi Yulu, and Fan Wenyao were all silent. Tianheng clasped his hands and laughed, goodbye. The battle to attack and defend Huda City was in full swing. A cavalry army of only about 10,000 quietly left the encampment and headed east like a lion hunting a rabbit. The leader of the cavalry was the commander of Bailiang's cavalry, Yuan Zuozong. His momentum was like a rainbow. Almost at the same time, there were 2 cavalry armies that had never fully appeared on the battlefield. They separately headed to the 2 dangerous passes at the junction of the cold and dark north. The 2 passes were heavily guarded, all of them elite Yuzhou infantry. The area around the pass was heavily guarded. There had always been an iron law that if unrelated people appeared, they would be killed without mercy. A few months ago, as a large number of sealed items were added to the 2 passes, a large number of Bailiang's top crossbowmen began to secretly roam around these 2 places. The 2 cavalry armies added together only had a little over 9,000 people. It was not weird for one person to have 2 horses, but what was shocking was that each of these war horses were Bailiang A-grade war horses. One must know that in the entire Bailiang, only 3,000 dragon elephant cavalry could be equipped with A-grade war horses. Yuzhou only had 300 to 400 of them. Lingzhou did not even have a single one. These strange horsemen clearly didn't carry cold swords or crossbows, but every one of them was an elite of the border army with outstanding physical strength. Their robust physiques and their swift and fierce aura were intimidating even if they didn't even wear light armor. One was the Rouge Cavalry. The other was the Wei Bear Cavalry. When they were on the battlefield, all of them wore armor. That was the Rouge Cavalry, the Wei Bear Cavalry. During the Battle of Huda City, when Lu Zhou was in a state of emergency, when Yan Wenguan had to move 10,000 death warriors to reinforce Xiaoguang City. 20,000 Yuzhou light cavalry. 10,000 Great Snow Dragon cavalry. The Iron Cavalry of the Bailiang Cavalry, 9,000 true heavy cavalry. They would all appear outside the mouth of the gourd. Chapter 1558. Liangzhou's Huda City had become the second fishing island of the Central Plains. However, that time, it was the Su clan's Iron Cavalry that was obstructed in the Central Plains. This time, it was the Northern Mang's horseshoes that were densely packed together in the Dragon Eye Plains outside the city. The great king of the southern courtyard, Dongzhua, personally led a crow's pen, patrolling a troop of infantry that was ready to attack. Beside this fatty was a young man and woman of noble status. Among them, the sickly-looking young man had many identities. None of them were simple. He was Chun Jinzhou of Northern Mang's 4 Great Jinzhou, the leader of the Southern Dynasty's strategist, the chess, sword, and music school's divination operator. Of course, his most fundamental identity was Tuoba Bodhisattva's eldest son, Tuoba Qiyun. The woman who had just been officially taken away by Zhong Tan of the Calabash Vanguard was called Yeluyu. This man and woman almost succeeded in scheming against Su Fingnian outside the Calabash Vanguard. Unfortunately, Yuan Zuozong led 10,000 Great Snow Dragon cavalry to the battlefield, making them and that Taiping commandant's efforts go to waste. Dong Zhuo pointed at Huda's city with his horsewhip and said, Huda's city, which is said to be able to support 10 years of war, has run out of winches and wooden bales in less than half a year. We've also used up more than half of the bricks and clay bales. We've also cut down countless iron bales, spears, and battering poles. There are only 3 crossbows left on the city wall that are still intact. The broken ones have piled up into mountains. Of course, there are still many small and medium crossbows and light crossbows in the city. There are still hundreds of thousands of arrows in the warehouse. However, compared to Xiangfan City, which had less than 100,000 soldiers but 300,000 civilians, Huda's city has a fatal flaw. There are too few people. Crossbows are dead. If they are broken, they can go to the warehouse and get new ones. The Bailiang Frontier Army in Huda's city is not immortal. Their arm strength is far inferior to the early stage. If you too have the opportunity to watch the battle, you should be able to see that most of the archers on the city wall have bandages on their arms. To put it bluntly, if you give me another 3 months, Dong Zhuo will be able to stand 100 steps away from the city. I reckon that not many archers will be able to pierce through my armor and kill me. Tuoba Chi-yun, whose body emitted a faint medicinal smell, had a solemn expression and did not comment. Because His Majesty had personally deprived Xia Zhemo of his position, Yeluyu came to Tiger Head City in a fit of pique to relax. She glanced at the fat man with a playful expression. He was a 35-year-old king of the southern courtyard, and he had millions of soldiers in his hands. He was almost as powerful as the old Prince Liang, Su Shao, and the 2 Liao Gu Jiantang. It was this guy who had insisted on attacking Bailiang first and had caused such a big commotion, causing His Majesty and the Taiping commandery to bear great pressure. In the end, other than Yang Yuanzhan on the eastern front, whose merits could barely offset his faults, the other 2 fronts were overshadowed. Especially Fatty Dong himself, who was forcibly blocked outside Liangzhou Pass by Huda's city. Even Lu Gui, who had only lost a few thousand men, had been cursed as an old dog in the western Jing court. For the time being, no one had the courage to impeach Commander-in-Chief Dong Zhuo. Yeluyu was very curious about how long this fat man, who privately called His Majesty Sister Emperor, could last. Dong Zhuo seemed to casually mention 3 months, but Yeluyu, who knew the rules of the court very well, sneered in her heart. Had he fallen to the point where he needed her and Tuoba Chi-yun to help him pass on a message to some people? Or was it that His Majesty and the Taiping commandery, who had placed great expectations on Dong Zhuo, could no longer hold back? Tuoba Chi-yun finally said, General Dong, I have been to the northwest camp on the Longyan Plain. Dong Zhuo grunted in acknowledgement. When she thought of the so-called northwest camp, Yeluyu suddenly felt somewhat disgusted. What camp? It was just a place to pile up sick and dead bodies. Pile up. The strength that the Southern Dynasty had accumulated over the past 20 years was all focused on offense, especially on siege materials. Otherwise, they would not have been able to pull out nearly 1,000 catapults of various sizes in one go. However, Beimang had never been good at treating the wounded on the battlefield. Under the scorching sun, Yeluyu, clad in a gorgeous golden armor, was already dripping with sweat. She had a natural yearning for war, yearning for the thrill of exchanging lives on horseback, yearning for the piercing feeling of an arrow piercing through the enemy's skull. Yeluyu was used to seeing dead people, but even someone as determined as her almost couldn't help but vomit when she arrived at the northwest barracks. Carts after carts of corpses were dragged down from the battlefield and thrown into large pits that had been dug. Wounded soldiers lay not far from the pits, wailing in pain. Many of the wounded soldiers, who had been badly mutilated by the city defense equipment, begged for a quick death. At the time, Tuoba Chiyun was standing at the edge of a new pit with 700 or 800 corpses piled on top of it. She asked the soldier in charge of sprinkling the lime for a basin. Yilu, with a thick cotton cloth covering her mouth and nose, watched as the spring basin expressionlessly sprinkled out handfuls of lime. She suddenly realized that she, who had been more cold-hearted than the men of the grassland since she was a child, actually felt sad for the first time after seeing this scene. Tuoba Chiyun's thoughts jumped around quickly. She changed the topic and said slowly, General Dong was anxious when fighting Bailiang, but he slowed down when fighting Hudu. The resilience and fighting habits of the nomads made Baimang's low need for food far exceed the imagination of the Central Plains cavalry. At least Baimang still did not lack food. However, if they could send their troops down south during the autumn season, Baimang would be able to handle the situation more easily in a stalemate. Tuoba Chiyun didn't want to speak too much belated advice. Besides, there was a reason why Dong Zhuo and the Taiping Order wanted to go down south at the beginning of spring. What Tuoba Chiyun really wanted to say was the second half of the sentence. If Dong Zhuo's Eastern Front had attacked the city without thinking of the consequences and took Hudu in one go, the current situation would not be so difficult to get off. This was not Tuoba Chiyun criticizing Dong Zhuo for not putting in effort when fighting Hudu. In fact, there was nothing wrong with Dong Zhuo's deployment. However, since Dong Zhuo was the king of the southern courtyard and the commander-in-chief of the million-strong army, he should have done more. Dong Zhuo nodded and said, At first, I suspected that other than the thousands of elite cavalry reported by our spies, there was another group of armored cavalry hidden in Tiger Head City. For example, the 6,000 iron Buddhas that were later given to the Qidong Kingdom. I even suspected that at least one of the two groups of Northern Liang's heavy cavalry, which totaled about 9,000 people, was hidden in Tiger Head City. Because I felt that since Chu Lushan dared to place the Huaiyang Pass behind Hudu, he must have wanted to fight me head-on. He wanted to fight with me south of Hudu and north of Liuya and Fuling in a big battle where both light and heavy cavalry would appear. Dong Zhuo said in a deep voice, Until that ambush where everyone had their own schemes, I first used 4,000 cavalry at Yislope as bait. As expected, the Fuling army's commander-in-chief Wei Liang was greedy for merit and advanced prematurely. His formation was disrupted by the 8,000 cavalry. If it was not for that Bailiang's junior commander-in-chief Wei Liang who ruined things at Kifulong Pass and was too brave to help the Fuling cavalry break through, the Bailiang's ambush should have entered the battlefield on time. My Dong family cavalry would also have moved. In the end, on that battlefield, I could lure out Fuling and Liuya, the two commanders-in-chief Huaiyang Pass, and even the Huda city cavalry. In this way, it would have become a situation where both sides' cavalry swapped places. Even if I, Dong Zhuo, suffered more losses, as long as I could destroy the mobility of the Bailiang cavalry's defensive lines south of Huda City, it wouldn't be a problem whether Huda City was conquered or not. Dong Zhuo said self-deprecatingly, Perhaps many people in the Bailiang Protectorate are cursing that junior commander-in-chief of Kifulong Pass for using his strength in the wrong place. But in reality, Liang Zhou was lucky enough to escape a calamity. A single Huda city isn't scary. What's scary is the nimble cavalry behind it that doesn't seek to kill the enemy, only to restrain them. Right now, I, Dong Zhuo, am not sure if I'm thinking too much, or if Chu Lushan's luck is good, or if he's actually thinking more than I am. Yilu Yuhu frowned and said, Can't we just press forward with all our forces and attack Fuling and Liuya together? In any case, we have the absolute advantage in terms of military strength. It would be a waste not to fight. Dong Zhuo dismissed it with a laugh and didn't explain anything. Tuoba Chiyun shook his head and said, It's not that we can't stake it all in one throw, but there's not much point. Just as Tuoba Chiyun was about to explain the specifics to Yilu Yuhu, Dong Zhuo rode along the edge of the infantry formation toward a group of dusty carriages. When the 1,000-man commander in charge of supervising his subordinates moving the corpses saw the king of the southern courtyard, he quickly dismounted and reported the battle situation to Dong Zhuo. It turned out that these corpses had all been dragged out from the tunnels leading into the city. Bei Mang's catapult attacks had intervals in between, but this unpresentable method of attacking the city had never stopped. However, there were still no obvious results. Apart from a group of 500 soldiers who entered Tiger Head City at the beginning, but they were quickly intercepted and killed by the armored city guards, the rest died in the narrow paths of the tunnels or were easily killed by those waiting for rabbits to appear at the cave entrances. It was reported that City Guard General Lu Jinu had long made preparations. He had dug out more than 10 holes that were 3 zhang deep in various strategic locations within the city beforehand, allowing the soldiers with sharp ears to stay within. As long as Bei Mang's cave masters and armored soldiers made any movements within several hundred or even 1,000 steps, they would be able to immediately seize the opportunity. Afterwards, whether it was digging holes horizontally to set up an ambush or using windmills to fan the smoke and lime, all of this was easy. That 1,000-man commander had only taken up this post because he lost an arm in the formation charging and attached army. After the single-armed man finished reporting the general battle situation and death toll, his eyes became slightly red. After lowering his head, he said quietly, "Great General, there have been 16 tunnels in total. Including this wave, the number of our brothers who have died underground has already reached 5,000. Is it worth it? To be able to die on top of Tiger Head City's city walls is also good." Dong Zhuo said calmly, "You all should head to the northwest camp." The single-armed 1,000-man commander raised his remaining arm to wipe his eyes. After getting on his horse, he led the carriages piled with corpses into the distance. Chapter 1559. Yilu Yuhu was inexplicably enraged. He took a deep breath and asked the king of the southern courtyard, when Beiliang attacked Qingzhou and Xiangfan City, they were experts at digging tunnels. Since they know how to attack, they're no newbies in defense. Moreover, the thousands of Beiliang cavalry in the city have clearly been on the city walls. Even if a few hundred men make it to the surface alive, what can they do? Dong Zhuo smiled, as if he didn't want to mention the 5,000 dead soldiers who didn't make any contributions. He said, 2 days ago, there was a group of cavalry in the city, and they were forced to climb up the city wall to defend it. They were much stronger when they dismounted from their horses than when they were exhausted. 2 of my Kiliarchs had already led their men to the top of the city wall. They were only 400 steps away from each other, and they almost gained a foothold on the city wall. Dong Zhuo pressed his thumb and forefinger together. Just a little bit. Tuoba Tianyun said helplessly, this little bit of opportunity was obtained by General Dong's order that every Kiliarchs must suffer 400 casualties before they can retreat. This is a huge price to pay. Dong Zhuo laughed. It's not even half over yet. Yilu Yuhu asked rudely, almost interrogatively, dare I ask, General, how many grassland men have died to the blades of our own people? Dong Zhuo gave it some serious thought before replying, there are 3 Kiliarchs and many centurions. Including the ordinary soldiers, there are 2,700 of them as of yesterday if I'm not mistaken. Yilu Yuhu said angrily, aren't you afraid of triggering a mutiny? Dong Zhuo asked in return, you want a mutiny after killing so many cowardly trash? Yilu Yuhu sneered. Indeed, General, you have 100,000 Dong family private soldiers who haven't suffered any casualties. You're also a general who commands troops with divine precision. You can definitely nip the bud in the bud. Tuoba Tianyun said, say no more. Yilu Yuhu wanted to say something but hesitated. Seeing Chun Jemo's displeased expression, she finally decided not to provoke this king of the southern courtyard who didn't live up to his name. The 2 riders bid farewell to Dong Zhuo and left. Yilu Yue turned his head to look at the sturdy figure who had stopped his horse. He said in a low voice, this fatty, so this is how he leads his troops. As an official, he is really capable. The war has already reached this point, yet he still doesn't forget to follow someone's wishes and beat down the forces of the grasslands little by little in front of Tiger Head City. A chilly arch had consumed the direct troops brought from the tribe, but where would the rest of the troops come from under the rapid rotation? Either they were replenished from the southern dynasty's military towns and mixed with sand, or they were simply mixed up with the remnants of the two armies. Yilu Yuhu's face was gloomy. He gritted his teeth and said, "It's all because of the people of the central plains of the southern dynasties. The Zhao clan of Liang used the Guangling Road to take back military power from the local vassals and generals. We're not bad either. The grassland people are all hurt here. Even if we break through Beiliang and enter the central plains in the future, how many of our own people will be left?" Tuoba Tianyun laughed. Complaining too much will cause your intestines to break." Yilu Yue glared at him. "You can still laugh. Do you think your Tuoba surname can stay out of this?" Tuoba Tianyun shook his head and smiled without saying anything. The fat man who stood alone in the crow's cage looked at Tiger's Head City. In his field of vision, the attacking infantry was like an unending tide, and then the tide surged up the city walls, creating waves that spread upwards. He waved his hand to call over a young strategist who was accompanying him. He said, "Pass down the order. First, stop digging the tunnel from today onwards. Second, increase the intensity of the attack. During the day, more than half of the infantry will be killed. During the night, the attack will not be based on casualties. Each Chiliarch only needs to attack Tiger Head City for 2 hours. Third, send a message to the western capital. In the entire southern dynasties, no matter their surname, as long as the family is on the ranking list, they must take out all the wine in their cellars to treat the wounds of the Eastern Front Army. Remember, this is all the wine of all the families of the southern dynasties. If someone secretly hides a jar, once exposed, the family's ranking will be downgraded from first to second, and so on. Fourth, tonight I want to summon all the generals and Chiliarchs on the Eastern Front who are not on the battlefield." The strategist quickly left to pass down the order. Dongjue said in a low voice, "Yilu Chukai." A burly officer who was temporarily acting as the leader of the Crow's Pen hurriedly urged his horse closer. This time, this general who was both a member of the Beimang imperial tent and the brother-in-law of the great king of the southern courtyard did not dare to smile. As long as his brother-in-law called out his real name, it meant that something big was about to happen. Yilu Chutsai's sister was Dongjue's eldest daughter-in-law. They both had the surname Yilu, but compared to Yilu Yuhui, she was much more noble. However, compared to Yilu Yuhui, who was said to have gone to the central plains of Liang to do nothing, the brother and sister were further away from the throne. Yilu Chukai had never had such an extravagant wish. Since he was young, he wanted to be a pure general who galloped on the battlefield. After having a brother-in-law like Dongjue, who was very much to his liking, he had been like a fish in water in the Dong army. However, in this southern expedition to Beiliang, his brother-in-law, who had always been easy to talk to, refused to let him be the vanguard. This made Yilu Chukai feel very hurt. Even when the Dong army went to Liuzhou not long ago, he had nothing to do with it. During this time, Yilu Chukai was as bitter as a widow. Dongjue glanced at his brother-in-law and smiled. "I'll give you a job, but it's a bit far. Do you want to take it?" Yilu Chukai asked carefully, "Will I get any military merits?" Dongjue said, "Not necessarily." Yilu Chukai said decisively, "Then I won't go." Dongjue smiled. "It's fine if you don't go. You still have a chance to attack the city tomorrow. I'll just switch people." Yilu Chukai was confused. "Attack the city?" Dongjue nodded. "The Dong clan has 12,000 soldiers. I'll leave them all to you. Tomorrow, we'll start attacking Huda City." Yilu Chutsai's mouth was wide open in shock. With his figure, it was really a big mouth. Compared to his sister's beauty, it was really a far cry. It really didn't look like they were born from the same parents. Yilu Chutsai's eyes suddenly burned. He did not call Dongjue brother-in-law, but respectfully called him Great General. This general was born in the cavalry. If you want me to dismount and attack a city, forget it. This general has decided. I'll take the first job. Dong Zhuo stared at him and said calmly, I'll leave the 80,000 Dong clan cavalry to you. Rush out of the gourd mouth as fast as you can. Although I've arranged for people to keep an eye on that place, I'm still worried. Also, before you leave, write a will. If you die, I'll have something to say to your sister. Yelu Chukai, who was famous for his playfulness in Beimang, grinned. He clenched his fist and pounded his chest. Great General, if this general doesn't come back and have no chance to see Great General and my sister's children, I'll tell them in the future that their uncle's only regret is that he didn't let them ride on his neck to play. Dong Zhuo hesitated. If it's the same with or without you at the gourd mouth, don't force yourself. Since you like children, get a wife and have them yourself. Yelu Chukai nodded and left on his horse. Dong Zhuo remained motionless. No one could hear this fatty muttering to himself. He was repeating a number, 38, 38. In Tiger Head City, the few towering watchtowers near the north of the city had become the main targets of the northern Mang's catapults. Meanwhile, the building where the main General Lu Jinu was located was even further back, so the threat posed by the catapults wasn't fatal. On the other hand, those northern Mang master archers who participated in the siege and were able to get close to the top of the city were all proud of themselves for being able to shoot down this building with their arrows. Even though this wouldn't be counted into their military exploits, they would still be treated as heroes after retreating from the battlefield. Lu Jinu stood beside the table with the map of Tiger Head City. The map had marked all kinds of details of the battlefield, such as the degree of damage to the city wall, the area where the ballistae were missing, and the dangerous battlements that had been hastily built several times, etc. Lu Jinu stared at the northeast area of the city defense map. After the ballistae were destroyed in this area, Beimang didn't give up on attacking the city from the north. They focused on increasing the density and thickness of their attacks in this area. A large number of siege weapons began to move from the northwest to the northeast. A city patrol officer walked into the building with large strides, laughing loudly as he said, General, these northern Mang barbarians really don't have a good memory. Another 700 or so rats died today, a small half of them suffocated to death. When this general brought people down, they were all slaughtered without much effort. Same as before, that tunnel has been completely filled up. In addition, there will be 2 acupoint masters and a cavalry troop watching the nearby area day and night. Lu Jinu nodded. He raised his head and asked, Have you used up all the lightning bolts hanging outside the watchtowers? Lightning bolts were a special type of soft curtain used by the Central Plains to deal with siege. They were tightly woven from coarse hemp and covered with mud to prevent fire. They were very effective against catapults and rockets. Although Tiger Head City's city wall was abnormally sturdy, if there weren't a large number of lightning bolts to reduce the impact of the flying rocks, Tiger Head City wouldn't be as easy to repair as it was now. A deputy general said helplessly, That's right. I didn't expect these barbarians to be able to get so many catapults. Fortunately, General, you've already made preparations. Otherwise, it would really be dangerous. Besides, we're running out of water bags. Not only the city gate, but all the sections of the city wall are also having a headache. There's no problem with the water source. It's just that the water bags made from the fur and internal organs of cattle and horses can't keep up. Those barbarians are risking their lives to pour oil on the top of the city wall and fire arrows like a rain of fire. They're really crazy. Fortunately, our mud-stained brooms to deal with fire attacks can be used repeatedly. Lu Jinu, who hadn't slept much for 2 days and 2 nights, picked up an arrow from the table and handed it to a captain beside him. All of you, look carefully. Chapter 1560. Lu Jinu passed the arrow around and said, In the past, Beimang used this kind of arrow when they attacked the city, but it wasn't on a large scale. They only started to appear in large numbers in the past 2 days. Previously, half of the arrows matched the current configuration of Beimang's elite cavalry. They used elongated arrowheads to penetrate Beiliang's armor. However, the other half were mixed with old-fashioned bronze arrows and iron arrows from the Dafeng dynasty. They were all flat and rectangular. Now, it's different. They're more refined and finely divided. That's why even all arrows and iron spine arrows have appeared. Lu Jinyu put down the arrow. The reason why I say this is because I think of the recent attacks by Beimang. I dare say that Beimang is taking a breather. It's a bit like a fight between masters in Jianghu. Before Beimang launches the next wave of attacks, this will be an opportunity for us. Of course, it could also be a trap. But no matter what, we should give it a try. That's why I've purposely let the cavalry go up to the city wall to remedy the situation. While giving the soldiers a breather, we also want our cavalry to take the initiative to leave the city. One of the captains who was responsible for guarding the city gate and who had been shot in the head by Beimang barbarians 2 days ago asked, "Do we need the soldiers on the city wall to cooperate and fight more fiercely?" Lu Jinyu shook his head and said, "No need. We don't want to be superfluous." Lu Jinyu slowly closed his eyes. It wasn't clear if he was so tired that he had to rest for a while, or if he was looking for an opportunity in his mind. Lu Jinyu suddenly opened his eyes. He pressed his fists on the table and stared at the 2 captains who were eager to give it a try. Beimang is responsible for protecting the cavalry on the 2 wings of the infantry. They've been watching the show for a long time and have slacked off. Tonight, 2,000 cavalry will be placed behind the north gate. After they leave the city, they'll charge at will. 1,000 cavalry from the east and west gates will attack the flanks. Remember, there is only an hour. I will only give the 3 cavalry armies an hour at most. No matter how many northern Mang soldiers you kill or injure, you must immediately return. You must not linger in battle without retreating. An hour later, my Tiger-Head city will once again open its gates. Lu Jinyu suddenly called out to the 2 captains who had left. Let me tell you in advance that Beimang might not even give us a chance to reopen Huda City. A tall, white-haired captain nodded and said, "Understood." The 2 captains who were a generation apart walked out of the room. Of course, the young captain looked behind him. Then he said to the old captain, "Old, what do you want to say? Do you really want to make things clear?" The captain stopped the captain of the captains of the captains. Of the captains. And song, of the song of the song of beef of Beimang, s, of song of Bemoff song, beat captains captain, of captains where captains was a, asses. T captains captains of years, of captain. T-tes, s. Of beasts. Of bean. Of course. The old man kicked the guy's butt and scolded softly, "Get back here. And let me finish." When Captain Song turned around again, the captain pointed to the north and said softly, "I only have a son and a daughter. My son died in Beimang in the first year of Yonghui. My son-in-law, who was also A's captain, died 8 years ago outside the Liangzhou Pass. Fortunately, I have grandchildren. The He family's bloodline hasn't been cut off. But it's not a good feeling to die before your own." The captain smiled. "I know you fought with my son-in-law in the past. You also complained that I chose him as my son-in-law and not you. That's why you've been fighting with me all these years in Huda City. With my temper, if it was 30 years ago, I would have beaten you to a pulp." The captain rolled his eyes and muttered, "Can't beat me." The old man couldn't be bothered to argue with this lad. He sighed with emotion and said, "Not counting the years of fighting in the Central Plains, I've been living in northern Liang for almost 20 years. I have a home and I live a peaceful life. Even if my family members die, the children can still wear mourning clothes. It's not like the chaotic times when I was young. Living is more difficult than dying. I occasionally return to my hometown and watch the children practice riding every day. They look like they know how to do it. They're even more skilled at holding a brush than I am at holding a spear. I listen to their study outside the study room. The way of life in Bailiang today is really good. The captain patted Captain Song's shoulder. In such a good world, we'll live as long as we can. As for me, I don't plan to go back no matter if the city gate can be opened a second time tonight. You want me to get off my horse and fight Baimang barbarians at the city gate in the future? I can't kill many of them. It's better to kill more on horseback. Little Song, are you still going to fight with old Bao to get out of the city? The captain cupped his fists slowly, but there were many things he couldn't say. The captain laughed and walked away in big strides. In the end, he was kicked in the butt by the guy surnamed Song. The latter ran downstairs like a gust of wind and said, "Old Biao, if I didn't take your daughter away back then, I swore to kick you in this life. Don't be angry." The old man patted the armor on his back and laughed, "You little bastard. Fortunately, I didn't choose you as my son-in-law back then." Baimang attacked the city day and night. Piles of orderly bonfires burned on the battlefield outside the city. Both Liangmang and Huda City were used to it. At midnight. In Taoist alchemy books, it was regarded as the beginning of Yang, the time of fire. On each of the three plazas leading to the three gates of Huda City, a cavalry unit began to go into battle. Long spears hung from their saddles, cold sabers hung from their waists, and crossbows were not carried. The old general in the north stretched out his hand and grasped the long spear that he had snatched from a West Chu general of the West Wall. He smiled and said, "Old man, after taking my surname, you haven't been wronged, have you?" When the creaking sound of the gate slowly opening was heard, the captain suddenly squeezed his horse's belly and began to charge. In order to cooperate with the three cavalry units, especially the cavalry in the north, and not to reveal any signs prematurely, a rain of arrows at the north gate was aimed at the Baimang barbarians near the city gate. Therefore, when the Baimang infantry were caught off guard and realized that the city gate had opened on its own, they were stunned for a moment. Even the scouts responsible for supervising the battle and patrolling hundreds of steps behind the city gate didn't immediately come back to their senses. When they saw the cavalry rushing out of the gate with their own eyes, the scouts were a little dumbfounded. But soon, someone turned his horse around and whipped it madly, galloping through a gap that was deliberately left open by the three infantry formations. When they turned around to pass on this urgent military news, the Baimang soldiers near the city gate had their heads smashed by the cavalry's spear or were directly sent flying by the impact of the spear. When the cavalry faced the infantry that didn't set up a formation, killing them was actually like cutting wheat with a knife. If it were a frontal clash between fully armored cavalry, both sides could borrow the great inertia of the warhorse's charge to cause great damage to the spear and the rider's arm. But now, the captain, who couldn't be more familiar with fighting on the battlefield, had been paying attention to his breathing since the very beginning. He definitely wasn't like a rash youth who wanted nothing more than to kill dozens of enemies in one breath. The captain also didn't overly pursue the speed of the warhorse's charge. As the leaders of a cone-shaped cavalry unit, they should all be like this. Otherwise, they would ruin the entire cavalry unit's pace and even cause the cavalry formation to break apart. Although this kind of situation was negligible in terms of cavalry battle steps, the old man was a true captain of Liang province's border cavalry. He had fought on horseback for most of his life, so it was natural for him to act this way. The 1,000-man Baimang barbarians on the right side of the city gate were in the midst of climbing the city walls. The 1,000-man men behind them hadn't yet come forward to take turns attacking the city. On the left side, 2 Kiliarchs were in the midst of exchanging commands. The old captain said to his deputy, "Lead 1,000 men and break through the formation. You go around the city." The 2,000-man cavalry quickly split up to the left and right, like a stream slipping away after meeting a rock. The old man led 1,000 men straight for the 1,000-man Beimang army that was still intact. The 6 or 7 Beimang soldiers in leather armor saw that they couldn't escape. They clenched their teeth and brandished their blades as they charged forward. The old captain directly charged past, the tip of his spear slanted slightly downwards, aiming at the neck of a Beimang soldier. The great penetrating force directly knocked this soldier who was raising his blade high off the ground. The moment the spear was about to pierce the enemy's neck, the old man's hands imperceptibly let go of the spear. In the next moment, he quickly grabbed the spear shaft again. The position he grabbed only shifted by less than an inch. However, it was precisely this short inch of distance created by letting go of the spear that allowed the old man to remove 50 to 60% of the resistance brought about by the spear's charge. Chapter 1561. The old man lightly pulled his spear back, pulling out the spearhead from the neck of the corpse and continuing to charge forward. This was the precious experience the elder had accumulated as a member of the Sioux family's cavalry when he was young, galloping through the great lands of the Central Plains. The younger generation of Northern Liang cavalry knew this trick, but normally, they wouldn't use it. After all, Northern Mang was also a cavalry army, so they didn't need to use this type of flashy but useless trick. However, it was very meaningful right now. In this type of situation where a small number of cavalry faced a large number of infantry, the longer the spear left their hands, the more enemies they would kill. When those 6 or 7 Northern Mang soldiers were rushed through, they instantly died. The soldiers on the two sides who were further away were also unable to escape death after the 1,000 cavalry quickly spread out. The most tragic one was that after dodging the spear of the 1st Cavalry, he was killed on the spot by the 2nd Cavalry of Tiger Head City. In the eyes of the 1,000 infantry not far away, they saw the cone-shaped cavalry charge out of the city in a few blinks of an eye. They had already formed a line of 100 cavalry. The Beimang lieutenant hollered, "Front row, raise your shields. Archers, get ready." The old lieutenant burst out into laughter. "Without a spear barricade formation and without heavy armor, you want to block the charge of my Beiliang cavalry with just 2 to 3 rows of scattered shield soldiers. I, He Lianshan, am a Beiliang soldier who has even charged past West Chu's great halberd soldiers. Didn't you all put in a lot of effort in sieging the city? Today, my Tiger Head City cavalry will teach you all a lesson." When he suddenly increased his speed. First, this row of elite Beiliang cavalry used the corners of their eyes to increase their speed. Very quickly, they continued to maintain a perfectly straight line. The cavalry behind this row did the same. The 1,000 cavalry were all the same. This was the Beiliang cavalry. The old lieutenant casually brushed aside an arrow that was flying towards his face. As for the one that was flying towards his shoulder armor, he did not even bother about it. The moment the cavalry touched the arrow, the heavens and earth seemed to have stopped. One by one, the Beiliang horses jumped high into the air. Above that line, above the heads of the Beimang soldiers who were kneeling and raising their shields, it was a spectacular sight. When the horses' hooves finally landed on the ground, it was time for the dead. A Tiger Head City lieutenant with astonishing physical strength fiercely stabbed his spear into the chest of a Beimang archer in the back row. He dragged the corpse, which was bleeding profusely, and slid backwards. The spearhead that pierced through the chest smashed into the abdomen of a second Beimang soldier behind him. The cavalry lieutenant suddenly pushed his spear and then let go. The moment the warhorse charged between the two corpses, the lieutenant bent down and grabbed the spearhead tightly. He pulled it out of the corpse in one breath. As if their hearts were connected, the Beiliang warhorse suddenly exploded with a shocking second charge. It fiercely knocked away the third Beimang barbarian who was trying to chop at his master's arm. The 1,000-man infantry formation, which only had a small number of shield soldiers, a certain number of archers, and a large number of city-climbing swordsmen, did not have any thickness to speak of. The 1,000-man and 1,000-horse charged through. The 900 cavalry from Tiger Head City did not stop at all. They did not care about the 1,000 Beimang men who were covered in dead and injured on the ground. They continued to rush towards the second phalanx that was 1,000 steps away from the first phalanx. Unlike the first phalanx, the archers in the second phalanx had more opportunities to shoot. The Chili Arch had even hurriedly borrowed nearly 100 shield men from the rear, and mixed in with a dozen or so spears that weren't very useful. It was really hard for this Chili Arch who had no choice but to make a last-minute effort. But further away, there was already a cavalry unit on the flanks that had begun to reinforce the infantry through the gaps. The old lieutenant who had the arrow nailed into his shoulder began to slow down his horse, whether intentionally or not. He breathed lightly with the rise and fall of the horse's back. The old man's gaze passed through the second infantry formation and looked even further away. Out of the corner of his eye, he paid attention to the movements on his left and right. The cavalry unit on the Beimang's right flank that was fighting the fire from afar numbered about 2,000. The old lieutenant shouted loudly, "Break through the left half of the infantry formation in front, and then just charge to the left. Let that Beimang cavalry unit eat dust behind us." When they were less than 500 paces away, the cavalry began to accelerate their charge. The front line began to shift to the left. After several waves of dense arrow rain, half of the 700 Tigerhead City cavalry successfully charged to the left. This time, they ruthlessly crashed into the third formation without holding back. After this collision, apart from the 50 to 60 cavalrymen who were still holding spears, this cavalry unit that seemed to have entered a no-man's land began to switch to Beiliang sabers. But this time, they abandoned their spears and switched to sabers. The damage inflicted on this Beimang infantry formation was even more exaggerated than when the Beiliang cavalry crashed into the second infantry formation. Most of those spears pierced into the chests of the Beimang infantry. The Liangzhou cavalry had an iron law. If the spears that left their hands before switching to sabers couldn't kill the enemy, they would be counted as having done nothing after the battle. In the firelight of the late night, this large expanse of dazzling snow-white sabers was particularly eye-catching. Even the commanding General Lu Jinu, who was far away on top of a tall building in Tigerhead City, could see everything clearly. This cavalry unit, including Lieutenant He Lianshan, had no intention of returning to Tigerhead City alive. Lu Jinu knew this very well. At this moment, Lu Jinu and the other lieutenants in the building were all standing in front of the railing. Lu Jinu didn't show any grief on his face. He only said in his heart, "Rest in peace. When we return, let's find the great general underground for a drink." Lu Jinu turned around and limped back into the building. He remembered that time when the young vassal king, who was covered in blood, led 20 or so Wu family swordsmen back to Tigerhead City. The young man casually asked Lu Jinu if the Central Plains couldn't be defended without Beiliang. Lu Jinu told the young man that the answer was no. In a short 20 years, the Central Plains was still unyielding. When the day came when there was no way to retreat, many people would realize that they could also face death without hesitation. Just like our Beiliang. In the end, Lu Jinu added with a smile, however, the Central Plains outside of Beiliang can be unafraid of death, but if they want to kill hundreds of thousands or even 1,000,000 barbarians like our Beiliang, they can forget about it. At that time, Lu Jinu saw the young man trying to hold back his laughter. Lu Jinu suddenly turned around and ran out of the building. A tall but meticulous officer immediately grabbed the Tigerhead City general and said angrily, "General, we've already given a military order to His Highness. Tigerhead City has to be defended for at least 3 months. That's the minimum. What's wrong? General, you want to quit? Isn't it easy to die? Don't talk about going out of the city to kill the enemy like Officer He. General, you just need to stand on the city wall and you'll definitely come back in 2 hours." Lu Jinu said unhappily, "I'm going to sleep." The tall officer was puzzled. Really? Several officers who were obviously worried about Lu Jinu said in unison, "I'll send you off, General." Lu Jinu thought about it and broke free from the tall officer's hands. Forget it, I'm not sleepy anymore. Come, let's quickly discuss how to bring back the other cavalry units that went out of the city. Judging from the movements outside the city, the Baimang cavalry is trying to set up a net. It's faster than we expected. We have to think of a way in 15 minutes. If there's no other way, we should let them return to the city immediately. We can't wait until the first hour. The tall lieutenant couldn't help but curse in a low voice. Lu Jinnu turned around but didn't stop walking. Say that again. The tall officer immediately shut his mouth. Lu Jinnu stared at him. Idiot. The tall officer turned around and curled his lips. Do you think I'm an idiot? In any case, I was brought out by you. Idiot, Lu Jinnu suddenly stopped and said in a deep voice, that's not right. Bring me the map of the entire Liangmang border. When the map was spread out on the table, Lu Jinnu fell into deep thought. The people in the building didn't even dare to breathe loudly. Lu Jinnu's gaze quickly moved around the borders of the three provinces. In the end, he narrowed his eyes and stared back at Tiger Head City. He slowly said, right now, Baimang's true goal isn't to eat up the Longxiang army in Lu province. It's not to take down Shaoguang City in Yuzhou, and it's not to take down our Tiger Head City. Everyone was puzzled. Could it be Lingzhou? But this was too preposterous. Lu Jinnu extended a finger and pointed at a military town. It's Huaiyang Pass behind Tiger Head City. To be more precise, it's the entire Liangzhou behind Protector General Chu Lushan. Someone asked, but as long as Tiger Head City is still there, Huaiyang Pass is a dangerous pass that can be attacked and defended. On the surface, there are several Beiliang's most elite cavalry that can provide support at any time. Although we just received a secret report that these cavalry troops are all ready, the Baimang barbarians definitely don't know the whereabouts of the 20,000 people. Under these circumstances, what can Baimang use to attack Huaiyang Pass? Someone said, it doesn't matter if Lu province is lost or not. As long as the Longxiang army can preserve half of its strength, with the addition of Yozhou's Calabash Pass, we can definitely form an encirclement. Then, if we can defend Tiger Head City for 3 months, Beiliang can even counterattack the 2 provinces of Baimang. Lu Jinnu was silent. Chapter 1562. When that sword flew from thousands of miles away to Luxia town, before Mr. White Lotus had revealed the secret of heaven, Liuzhou was already on the verge of war. 3 Liuzhou officials, 2 civil and 1 military, walked on top of the city wall. Their position was closer to the side of the parapet wall, which was slightly shorter than the outer walls. Outside the city, small groups of Baimang cavalry constantly roared past. There were at least 30 to 200 of them. Occasionally, they would ride and shoot, but they did not cause any damage to the soldiers defending the city. In fact, it was like they were here to enjoy the scenery, filled with a strong sense of provocation. The only old man among the 3 of them was wearing the official uniform of a 3rd-rank official, embroidered with peacock patches. Just now, a few sharp arrows flew over the old man's head. The old man smiled and said, "Evil guests are at the door. You like to throw shoes at people's doors so much. If I get the chance." At this point, the old man paused. He turned his head and smiled at the young man wearing the military robe. "General Ko, will I have such a chance?" The self-proclaimed Dragon King of the West, Kai Junchen, had been sent by the King of Beiliang to Lingzhou's Huangnam County to be the governor of the county. He and his wife, Yu Ruru, lived happily together. The Dragon King's residence in Qingcang City had been changed to the residence of the governor of Liuzhou. This old man was the highest-ranking civil official in Liuzhou, the governor Yang Guangdou. The civil official beside him was the Gongnamdu scholar Chen Shiliang, who had taken root in Liuzhou and was unwilling to leave. When Qingcang City realized that Lu Gui's army intended to attack the city, the governor's residence had an intense argument that lasted through the night. As for whether to defend or to retreat, it evolved into two sharply opposing camps. The older officials of Liuzhou all advocated that as long as the Green Hills were there would be no need to worry about firewood. They might as well give up on Qingsang City and head to Linyao military town under the escort of the Longxiang army. As long as they were still alive, there would not be any problems with the military and political operations of Liuzhou. As for the younger generation of officials, regardless of whether they were from a general family or scholars from the Central Plains, they all strongly requested to defend Qingsang City to the death, fighting for the Longxiang army to have the best opportunity to battle Dinglu province. Originally, as long as the two of them reached an agreement, this quarrel would not become more and more intense. However, the problem was that the experienced and prudent provincial governor Yang Guangdou unexpectedly supported defending the city to the end. On the other hand, Chen Shiliang, whose prestige among the refugees of Liuzhou was even greater than that of the young vassal king, was the complete opposite. He suggested moving the provincial governor's residence to Linyao. As a result, the two sides were in a deadlock. Then, the newly appointed Lu province general entered Azure City at this moment. Ko Jianghuai stretched out his hand and gently pressed it against the rough female wall. He did not make any big statements, nor did he pat his chest and promise anything to the old provincial governor. The ancient military town under his feet was used by the Great Feng dynasty to control the vast western regions. As the number one military town in Liuzhou, which was closest to Liangzhou, this little city wall was just a decoration. Even though it had been urgently reinforced after being incorporated into Beiliang's territory, it still made Ko Jianghuai, who was used to seeing the majestic cities of the Central Plains, find it laughable. This young Liuzhou general who had rushed here with several hundred cavalry was temporarily carrying out his duties in a residence near the provincial governor's residence. However, in the vast Liuzhou that was comparable to the entire old Beiliang road, there were only a handful of places that Ko Jianghuai could mobilize. For example, the current most intimidating military force in Liuzhou, the 30,000 Longxiang army, was directly under the jurisdiction of the Protectorate General. The main general, Su Longxiang, and his two deputies, Li Mofan and Wang Lingbao, were not people that he could order around. If Ko Jianghuai dared to interfere with the specific promotions of the Longxiang army, the Liuzhou general's position as general of Liuzhou could probably be counted on one hand. From start to finish, Ko Jianghuai did not recognize a single one of the generals and soldiers of Linyao and Fengxiang. Right now, he only had the 4,000 Qingsang army soldiers in Azure City and the 10,000 or so refugees that Chen Shiliang had gathered at his disposal. Even though they were not bad in individual combat and barely passable in defending a city, when placed on a large-scale battlefield, Ko Jianghuai did not know what else they could do other than give military merit to Lu Gui. Therefore, as a general of Liuzhou who was determined to achieve great things in the western regions, he was even worse off than a housewife who could not cook without rice. Right now, he did not even have a decent stove. Ko Jianghuai walked near the outer wall and looked at a group of Beimang cavalry galloping away in the dust. He said softly, "The provincial governor wants to defend to the death because he feels that if he retreats, Liuzhou will go from being balanced to being in a disadvantageous position where he will have no initiative at all. A slight move in one part will affect the entire situation, causing a large hole to be torn in the connection between Liuzhou and Liangzhou. Beimang's Nanchao military town and Dongzhuo's central line will be able to send an endless stream of troops here and thus affect the entire layout of Liangzhou. Mr. Chen wants to retreat because he is worried that the Longxiang army will fall into a trap and suffer great losses in the battle with Lu Gui's army outside Qingsang City. Once the Longxiang army loses the ability to pin down Beimang's western line army." Chen Shiliang rudely interrupted Ko Jianghuai. "Although I can't say that I am familiar with military affairs, I know that Lu Gui was able to endure until now because he definitely wants to fight a decisive battle. Qingsang City is the bait. I can even be sure that when Lu Gui's army attacks Qingsang City, they will not be too swift and violent at first. They will only bait and force the Longxiang army to increase their forces bit by bit until all 30,000 of the Longxiang army is trapped in a quagmire. Moreover, I am not advocating for Qingsang City to be abandoned, but rather for the provincial governor's officials to retreat to Linyao military town. Qingsang City will still be defended to the end by me and those 14,000 soldiers. This way, the Longxiang army will be able to attack and retreat, and will not be trapped in a quagmire. The current Qin Shiliang's skin was tanned, and he no longer had the elegance of the weak scholar from Baohua Temple. To put it simply, he used to be a handsome scholar who could have caught the eye of a vixen in an ancient temple. Now, even if there were vixens in the world, they would not be willing to pay attention to a scholar with calloused hands who toiled all day. Yang Guangdou, who had been filled with anger for the past 2 days, coldly snorted. Not just me, but almost the entire Liang knows that in the king of Beiliang's heart, you, Qin Shiliang, are worth the entire provincial governor's mansion. Qin Shiliang frowned. Then tell the Longxiang army in charge of the escort that I, Qin Shiliang, will also retreat to Linyao military town. Yang Guangdou laughed angrily. Do you think that Li Mofan and Wang Lingbao, who can become generals, are idiots? They are all shrewd. It's fine if I, Yang Guangdou, die, but if you, Qin Shiliang, die in Qingsang City, under the nose of Li Mofan and Wang Lingbao, 2 dignified deputy generals of the Longxiang army, do you still want to climb up the ranks of the Beiliang frontier army? Ko Jianghuai laughed as he interrupted the two's argument. Those who are good at using troops should first consider defeat before considering victory. This is indeed a valuable advice in military books. In truth, Yang Guangdou was very curious about this young West Chu survivor who had almost become a general. According to Ko Jianghuai's temperament during the series of battles in Guangling, he was not a general who calculated the gains and losses of one place. On the contrary, Ko Jianghuai, whose overall military strength was inferior, was best at large-scale long-distance raids. He always had the advantage in the battlefield, causing the Guangling army that had been beaten into a sieve to be badly battered. Zhao Yi's elite troops were so frightened that they did not even have the courage to go out of the city to help. They were afraid that they would take the initiative to walk into a trap again. After Ko Jianghuai wiped out all of Zhao Yi's main forces on the eastern front, they completely lost contact with the various cities and passes. Yang Guangdou had originally thought that after Ko Jianghuai came to Qingsang City, he would support Qin Shiliang and the other civil officials and advisors in the provincial governor's mansion who were focused on stability. After thinking about it, Yang Guangdou was also worried that the young Ko Jianghuai was anxious to establish his prestige in Liuzhou and wanted to use the Battle of Qingsang City to accumulate military merit for himself. Yang Guangdou hesitated for a moment, then decided not to hide anything. He directly asked, "How confident is General Ko? Can you give this official a hint?" Ko Jianghuai gazed at the Beimang camp in the distance. If Qingsang City is just Qingsang City, and all the variables are only inside and outside Qingsang City, unaffected by outside interference, and the soldiers on both sides are just these people on the surface, then I only have a 10% chance of making the situation in Liuzhou better. Qin Shiliang smiled bitterly and said nothing. Chapter 1563. Ko Jianghuai continued, the situation in Lu province is different from the eastern front of the Guangling path that I was at. Over there, it seems that there are many cities and passes, but they are all dead, like chess pieces on a chessboard that do not move once they take root. The generals of the Guangling army of the Liyang imperial court have all walked into a dead end, as if they do not have a city, they do not have a soul. In Lu province, it is very different. This is a battlefield that is destined to be decided by the cavalry. The 2 garrisons of Linyao and Fengxiang are a small variable, while the backup that Lu Gui has hidden is a big variable. Similarly, it is a matter of saving a nearby fire from afar. Ko Jianghuai pointed to the east, even further east than the camp of Lu Gui's army. The true variable is in the hands of Beiliang. As long as Liangzhou sends 10,000 cavalry to Lu province, they do not need to be the Great Snow Dragon cavalry or the 6,000 iron stupas of Qidong. As long as it is the most ordinary cavalry of Liangzhou, it will be enough. Yang Guangdou shook his head. Although I advocate defending Qingsang City to the death, I am also clear that the survival of Qingsang City cannot wait for the cavalry of Liangzhou to hear the news and arrive. We can only rely on the 14,000 people in Qingsang City and the 30,000 Longxiang army outside the city. At most, we can add on the 7 to 8,000 cavalry from Linyao and Fengxiang. Ko Jianghuai laughed. In any case, we are already defending Qingsang City to the death. It is not a bad thing for us to think a little more. Ko Jianghuai turned his head to the worried Qin Shiliang and smiled. In order to calm the people and prevent them from collapsing in one battle, I will have to trouble Sir and those youths of Lu province to make a false military report. Just say that Beiliang's cavalry is on the way. As long as Qingsang City is not broken through in 5 days, not even a single Beimang barbarian will be able to stand in Lu province. Chen Shiliang's face was somewhat angry. Ko Jianghuai purposely ignored him and asked with a smile, "What, sir, you can't bear it? Do you feel that it goes against your conscience?" Actually, from another perspective, it was simple. Since they had to defend the city to the death regardless of whether or not there were reinforcements from the Liangzhou province, a high morale meant that fewer people would die than a low morale. Mr. didn't want Qingsang City to be breached in a day or two. How many times could the 14,000 people who were scattered in all directions withstand the killing of the Beimang army? Sir, you are a proper scholar, so you might not know much about military affairs. The battlefield where the most people die the fastest is not during the siege, nor is it when the cavalry forces clash or when the cavalry forces break through the infantry formation. Instead, it is the massacre after the city is breached, or the pursuit of the defeated soldiers in the wilderness. Qin Shiliang then asked 2 questions. General Ko is willing to fight to the death with Azure City. Are you really willing to die here? Ko Jianghuai seemed to be avoiding the important and dwelling on the trivial. His tone was calm as he said, I, Ko Jianghuai, came to Luzhou as the general of Luzhou to win the war. I am not afraid of death, but at the same time, I cherish my life. Qin Shiliang said his goodbyes and left. Ko Jianghuai smiled and didn't take it to heart. Yang Guangdou didn't follow Qin Shiliang down the city wall. He sighed and said, General Ko should be able to see that Qin Shiliang has already treated Qingsang City as his home in Luzhou. Why are you still rubbing salt on his wound? Moreover, with Qin Shiliang's temperament, once he has a bad impression of someone, it will be difficult to change it for the rest of his life. General Ko is also not doing business in Luzhou. You want to make a name for yourself here. Since that is the case, why do you still want to become enemies with Qin Shiliang? Ko Jianghuai asked back, is Qin Shiliang just a gentleman who would rather take the easy way out? Yang Guangdou shook his head and said, that is looking down on him too much. Qin Shiliang might not necessarily be the next Li Shan. Compared to Su Beiji who is successful in Lingzhou, I am more optimistic about Qin Shiliang. Ko Jianghuai stretched out his hand and slid it across the slightly hot arrow stacks on the wall. He said softly, the spy report that Lu Zhou sent to Liangzhou is just to leave the rest to fate. I am betting that Liangzhou has someone who can see through the situation. In short, this time, Lu Zhou will either lose completely or make a huge profit. Yang Guangdou sighed. If only I had half a year to create a rough beacon system on the southern line of Luzhou, I would not be so passive. Unfortunately, time does not wait for me. Ko Jianghuai's eyes were complicated. No one knew what this general of Luzhou, who had taken over a hot potato the moment he took office, was planning. The Longxiang army camp south of Qingsang City was different from Lu Gui's army, which was filled with resentment and undercurrents. It was also different from the hesitation in Qingsang City. From top to bottom, the entire Dragon Elephant army didn't have any distracting thoughts. Last year, they marched straight into northern Mang, practically sweeping through most of Gusai province, beating the 4 military towns of tile-building Gentleman's Pavilion, Ligu, and Maolong to the point where they wished they were dead. In the end, even Dongjue had no choice but to personally take the field, yet they still lost around 5,000 elite private soldiers. At the beginning of spring this year, they had swallowed up over 8,000 Chang cavalry troops known as the Desert Ghosts in one go. The morale of the Dragon Elephant army had been accumulated through victory after victory in such tough battles. Before Su Longxiang took command of the Dragon Elephant cavalry, Deputy Generals Li Mofen and Scarface and Wang Lingbao were already border generals. In these 10 years, when did they not fight a few battles with the Beimang barbarians? The black-clothed teen sat on a small hill. Beside him lay the shockingly huge black tiger. It was lazily dozing off, occasionally shaking its body and kicking up a large cloud of dust. Li Mofen and Wang Lingbao each held their horses and stood not far away. The fierce-looking Scarface asked softly, looking at the situation, "The Beimang barbarians are going to make their move tomorrow. We will definitely fight this battle, but how should we fight? Old Li, do you have any ideas?" Li Mofen's warhorse was like a mobile armory. Not only was there an iron spear hanging from it, there was also a riding bow and 2 light crossbows. There was also a pouch full of short halberds. Li Mofen himself was also carrying a sword. After hearing Wang Lingbao's question, this deputy general of the Longxiang army, who had a mixed reputation, said unhappily, "Ideas? The 30,000 Longxiang army is all cavalry. Isn't it just a cavalry versus cavalry? What other tricks can they play? That old man Lu Gue is clearly using Qingsang City as bait to catch a big fish like our Longxiang army. Then we will take the bait. However, we have to drag this fisherman into the water and tell them that it is not so easy to pull chestnuts out of the fire. It is very easy to play with fire and burn themselves." Wang Lingbao chuckled and said, "Our deputy general Li also has times when he is nervous. In the past, when you talked about how to use the troops, you were always clear and logical. You wanted to use every single cavalry on the blade. If I didn't interrupt you, you would be able to talk for a few hours without panting." Li Mofen's face was gloomy, but he did not refute. Wang Lingbao leaned over and asked quietly, "Are you worried that you won't be able to stop Tuoba Bodhisattva?" Li Mofen shook his head. Both sides together have about 150,000 soldiers. In such a large battlefield, a martial grandmaster is not that important. Tuoba Bodhisattva has no say in the Beimang Western Front Army. Even if he joins the battle, although he can affect the situation to a certain extent, he cannot truly decide the outcome. Wang Lingbao rolled his eyes and said, "Then what are you worried about? It's not like you don't know what kind of crap the cavalry of Gusai Prefecture's 4 towns are. Unless that old man Lu Gue uses the heavy armored infantry as the central army and sets up a horse-repelling formation to the death, and then places all the cavalry on the 2 wings, using this kind of most inflexible turtle tactic to deal with the Dragon Elephant army, then we won't have any opportunity to bite them." Li Mofen still shook his head. If this Beimang were to use a tactic that any mediocre general would use, then he wouldn't be Lu Gue. Wang Lingbao was also a bit irritated. He suddenly thought of something and asked curiously, "That Liuzhou general surnamed Ko wants us to leave him 5,000 elite troops and not use them no matter what the situation is. What's the deal? Did we really agree?" Li Mofen said helplessly, "In any case, the general has already agreed. Just do as he says." There was a long silence. Wang Lingbao suddenly laughed and said, "Old Li, I didn't think that in the end, not a single one of those civil officials from Qingsang City went to Linyao. Do you think that in this world, only our Beiliang has this kind of situation? But it's not that I, Wang Lingbao, don't have a conscience. Whenever I think of this group of civil officials appearing on the city walls to learn how to draw a bow and shoot an arrow, I really want to laugh." Li Mofen's face also had a hint of a smile. Wang Lingbao subconsciously touched the scar on his face and asked, "Old Li, how many years have we fought side by side?" Li Mofen was taken aback and only replied, "I forgot." Wang Lingbao laughed loudly. I also forgot. In short, it had been many years. Chapter 1564. Beimang's iron hooves passed by Crouching Bao City and Luani City before being stopped outside Yozhou's pass by Xiaoguang City. If they couldn't break through this pass and successfully enter Yozhou's territory, all of Beimang's cavalry troops on the eastern front would be useless. Outside the city, 2 Beimang officers on the eastern front were closely guarded by no less than 1,000 elite soldiers. They were inspecting the situation at the top of the city walls. Commander Yang Yuanzhan sighed emotionally. The ancients really didn't lie to me. Apart from this city, the mouth of the bottle gourd is already in my hands. However, as long as Xiaoguang City is not broken, we will never be able to fight to the death with those 30,000 Yuzhou cavalry troops. Zhong Tan, the vanguard general who had just been conferred the title of Xia Zhibo by the emperor, laughed. It's really hard on you, great general. It's like you're leading a nest of baby birds, crying piteously for food. It's so noisy every day. The old general laughed. Once we pass through Xiaoguang City, the entire Yuzhou will be under our hooves. At that time, it'll be easy to fight. There will be opportunities and military contributions everywhere. However, how much we can stuff into our pockets will depend on our own abilities. Zhong Tan, who had personally gone up to the city to fight yesterday, was covered in a bloody aura. He said softly, "Now, we just have to wait for Yan Wenluan to bring his Yuzhou infantry to fill the gap in Xiaoguang City. Otherwise, Xiaoguang City will fall in 3 days at most." Yang Yuanzhan sneered, "Xiaoguang City is not Huda City. The city is only so big. How many people can stand on the city walls? Yan Wenluan will at most send 6,000 people to Xiaoguang City to participate in the defense. Any more and they'll only be able to squeeze into the city to watch the show, let alone go to the city walls." Yang Yuanzhan looked at Xiaoguang City in the distance, whose defenses were already stretched to the limit. All of the large ballistae had been destroyed, especially after their infantry had almost destroyed Crouching Bao City and Luani City. During this period of time, hundreds of catapults had been madly hurling boulders at Xiaoguang City. As a result, during this summer, there was a lot of rain above Xiaoguang City. Apart from the fortresses on the 2 sides of Xiaoguang City and Luani City, all of the other strongholds had already been cleaned out by the Beimang cavalry troops who were crazed for military contributions. The beacons at the mouth of the bottle gourd were undoubtedly the first to bear the brunt of the attacks and had long become the best hunting targets. Some of the larger fortresses with slightly more soldiers were also broken through after a few or even a dozen private cavalry troops converged. This action had saved Yang Yuanzhan a lot of trouble. Right now, after Crouching Bao City and Luani City had been destroyed, the mouth of the bottle gourd was actually very suitable for cavalry to gallop over long distances. It could be said that as long as Yang Yuanzhan's army on the eastern front took Xiaoguang City, not only would Yuzhou be wide open, given the absolute disadvantage of the Yuzhou cavalry, the eastern front of Beimang would be able to attack and retreat all the way to the mouth of the bottle gourd to the north of Xiaoguang City. No matter how outstanding Yan Wenluan's infantry troops were, how could 2-legged infantrymen outrun 4-legged cavalry troops? As a result, even though Zhong Tan's infantry troops suffered astonishing losses, with 2,000 or 3,000 man squads collapsing miserably every day, the old general who was frowning on the surface was actually not too worried. In the depths of his heart, he even secretly rejoiced in the misfortune of his old friend, Lu Gue, who was in charge of the Western Front. Back then, Xi Jing wanted Lu Gue to go to Lu Province, where the Beiliang frontier army did not have any strongholds to rely on, but wanted Yang Yuanzhan to attack Yuzhou, wanting him to lead his troops through the mouth of the bottle gourd, a terrifying region that was said to be capable of burying 150,000 Beimang soldiers. How could Yang Yuanzhan not have any complaints? However, looking back now, fortune and misfortune truly came hand in hand. The will of the heavens was hard to fathom. Out of the corner of his eye, Zhong Tan caught a glimpse of the old general's confident expression. This vanguard general with illustrious military achievements wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. In the end, he swallowed the words back into his stomach and did not voice his conjecture. The reason why he was able to squeeze out Yellow Yuhu and become the new Xia Zhibo with less than a year of military service was because of the words of an A-rank tycoon in the imperial court of Xijing. Zhong Tan alone has caused the deaths of 50,000 soldiers of our Eastern Front army at the mouth of the Bottle Gourd. It's no different from having 50,000 more brave infantrymen who are adept at sieging cities and raiding strongholds. How can I not become Xia Zhibo? Logically speaking, as a member of the Zhong family who had leaped to the same level as Xia of the Central Plains and Ko Jianghuai of the Western Frontier and Song Li of the Central Plains should be the most complacent. However, Zhong Tan always felt that the situation in Yuzhou was not so simple. Yang Yuanzhan suddenly pointed at the city wall where the situation had taken a sharp turn for the worse. Instead of being alarmed, he laughed out loud and said, "Zhong Tan, look. Yan Wenluan finally can't sit still. I thought this old man had dug a big hole for us in Yuzhou. Unexpectedly, he only has this little willpower. I'm disappointed, truly disappointed." When Zhong Tan saw the desperate situation at the top of Xiaoguang City, he finally felt relieved of a heavy burden. Xiaoguang City's geographical location could be said to be blessed by the heavens. It occupied the only pass at the mouth of the Bottle Gourd that could allow a large-scale cavalry army to pass through. As a result, the battle here could only be fought head-on. It was impossible for either side to launch a surprise attack. Zhong Tan's troops on the Eastern Front had recently been able to continuously pour into the city wall. Yesterday, Zhong Tan had personally led 800 Deathsworn onto the city wall and fought fiercely for less than an hour before they were chased off the wall. When the main battlefield of a siege changed from being ants clinging to the city wall to a melee battle, it often meant that the city was not far from being breached. Most likely because they knew that Xiaoguang City was in imminent danger, this was the first time Yan Wenluan's old battalion had appeared on the battlefield at the mouth of the Bottle Gourd. Zhong Tan urged his horse forward. Without the threat of the ballistae on the city wall, with Zhong Tan's martial cultivation and armor, he did not fear the arrows of the scattered master archers on the city wall. Zhong Tan raised his head and looked over. Sure enough, a large wave of Yozhou's old battalion infantry had arrived at the top of the city wall. They were wearing the classic, swallow armor, which was meticulously crafted by Bailiang's official craftsmen. This kind of swallow armor was composed of 1,500 pieces of refined iron armor leads, which were then connected with tough leather strips and nails. It weighed more than 60 jin and was not in any way inferior to West Chu's first-rate heavy infantry. Moreover, Bailiang men were naturally superior to West Chu's soldiers in physique. The Yen clan's infantry wore heavy armor and held spears in their hands as they stood in formation. During the Spring and Autumn War, they had once caused the West Chu cavalry to be flabbergasted. The birth of heavy infantry in the Great Feng dynasty and the formation of the Spring and Autumn Nine Kingdoms was originally the result of large-scale cavalry gradually becoming the main characters of the battlefield. This was especially true after the grassland cavalry became increasingly unstoppable. Since the infantry could no longer compare to the cavalry in terms of agility, they might as well completely abandon mobility and use inaction to suppress the enemy. Of course, heavy infantry were originally not a precious soldier type used to defend a city. It was not purely because fighting infantry with infantry was a waste of talent, but because heavy infantry were simply too heavy. It was not wise for them to engage in close combat at the top of the city wall, where every inch of land was worth its weight. However, the 400 Beimang daredevils who had already reached the top of Xiaoguang City were practically wiped out by the swallow armor in a single exchange. Zhong Tan turned to a messenger and said in a heavy voice, "Have Zhenglin lead 2,000 cavalry to support the retreating infantry." On the top of the city wall, life and death were decided immediately. The Beimang infantry were already pretty much exhausted, but one of them still managed to deliver a ferocious blow with his blade. In the end, the well-armored Yen family heavy infantry raised his left arm and casually swung his blade aside. That old battalion Yen family elite continued to charge forward. The cold blade in his right hand instantly pierced through the chest of this leather-armored Beimang barbarian. Relying on the tremendous momentum, he directly knocked this Beimang soldier against the outer wall. After quickly pulling out his blade, he raised it up with both hands, ripping out a bloody gash from the waist to the shoulder of a Beimang barbarian who had been waiting for an opportunity to hack at his face. Scarlet blood splattered all over this heavy infantry soldier's face, making him look especially sinister. A Beimang soldier was knocked out of the city through a crack in the wall. On the top of Xiaoguang City, metal armor clanged. One after another, the bloody heads of the Beimang soldiers were tossed down from the top of the city wall by those burly armored soldiers. Apart from the soldiers who had climbed up the city wall, no one was spared. When the Beimang siege soldiers heard the drums of retreat, they hurriedly pulled down their scaling ladders. Above them, heads and corpses constantly fell down, as well as a rain of arrows from the archers who had returned to the top of the city wall. This rain of blood and arrows was Xiaoguang City's most powerful answer to the rain curtain created by the Beimang catapults. Xiaoguang City, whose gates had been tightly shut all this time, opened for the first time. A large group of heavily armored soldiers charged out. On the top of the city wall, the heavily armored Yuzhou soldiers slid down the scaling ladders and began a one-sided slaughter of the Beimang soldiers who could not retreat in time. Like a flood pouring out of the city, Beimang soldiers constantly drowned in blood. Chapter 1565. When the 2,000 Beimang cavalry closest to the city walls received Zhong Tan's orders, they began to accelerate their charge, launching wave after wave of mounted archery in an attempt to suppress the formation of Xiaoguang City's infantry as much as possible while assisting their own soldiers in their retreat. At the same time, the foot archers on the city walls, which had a longer range than the mounted archers, decisively gave up on killing the Beimang infantry and turned toward the Beimang cavalry that were currently making their way out of the city. The cavalry commander, Jinglin, raised his arm and paused. The cavalry no longer advanced and began to slowly retreat 50 paces. The vast majority of the arrows from the city walls landed within these 50 paces. Jinglin turned around and surveyed his surroundings, feeling somewhat depressed. Apart from the infantry that were urgently retreating from the flanks of the cavalry, the main culprits that were preventing their cavalry from rushing to the battlefield just so happened to be the infantry formations that were supposed to be in charge of following up on the siege. Otherwise, as long as they had 2,000 cavalry to block the city gates, given the current number of crossbows in Xiaoguang City, they wouldn't be able to pose too much of a threat. Then, even if the 4,000 cavalry couldn't completely stop the infantry from leaving the city, they would at least be able to make it impossible for them to spread out their formation comfortably. Jinglin's cavalry could be considered the elites of the Eastern Front. Apart from the fact that they hadn't brought any spears because they hadn't expected to charge into the enemy formation, they had all sorts of mounted bows and foot archers. Lassos, axes, and all sorts of other weapons were also present. They were all clad in uniform chainmail, which was even more extravagant than the leather armor of ordinary grassland cavalry. Jinglin's unmoving cavalry seemed like a crane among a flock of chickens amidst the fiercely retreating Beimang infantry. Very soon, several cavalry reinforcements arrived with great difficulty, making their way through the infantry. Altogether, there were about 3,500 cavalry. However, opportunities on the battlefield were always fleeting. Under the skilled assistance of nearly 1,000 auxiliary troops in charge of transporting supplies, the Yuzhou infantry had already calmly formed up outside Xiaoguang City's gates, their numbers as dense as hedgehogs. However, for some reason, this infantry did not place the 3 axes, antler wood, caltrops, or barricades in front of their formation. Jinglin couldn't help but find this rather strange. For better or for worse, Xiaoguang City was the last strategic town on the Hulukku defensive line. Even if they had never thought of going out of the city to control cavalry by foot, the city should still have these common military items stored up. Jinglin chuckled. It was better that there weren't any. Those large barricades with 4 slanted logs and holes for metal spears, as well as those simple barricades that the strategist had explained countless times, truly made a cavalry commander like Jinglin feel his scalp go numb just from hearing about them. Jinglin carefully observed the division of troops among the Yuzhou infantry. Sure enough, it was just as those scholarly strategists had said. The sturdy shield men with the strongest physical strength raised large shields almost as tall as a person at the front, while the sharp spears in the back thrust out from the shields. Above the rattan walls, there were many rows of spears that made the cavalry feel a chill even in the middle of summer. Behind them were the axemen who gave up on cold blades and wielded large axes. Behind them were the archers who could draw their bows and kill the enemy before the cavalry, as well as the waist crossbows and rear crossbows, which had a longer range than the infantry bows. Jinglin subconsciously raised his butt off the back of his horse, trying to get a clearer look. However, it was very difficult for him to discover any more of the profundities of the Yan clan's old battalion. A 1,000-man commander who had come from the grasslands of Biting to the Huluku asked with a smile, "General Jing, what do you say? Why don't you let me lead the troops in a charge first? It's not a bad idea to test the waters." Jinglin looked at this young 1,000-man commander. He was the eldest son of a certain clan that occupied a large area of fertile grasslands in the north. He was young and full of vigor. Previously, he had accomplished quite a number of military exploits in the beacon fort around Luanha City. Now, he was just waiting to break through Xiaoguang City and go on a killing spree in Yuzhou. It was said that this kid had already discussed with a group of Biting nobles of similar background. When they entered Yuzhou, they would ignore everything else and work together to set their sights on that place called Yanji County. The women there were so beautiful that even the men of the central plains of Liang would drool over them. When the time came, they would pick out a few hundred of the most beautiful women to enjoy alone, while the other women of Yanji County would be sold to the nobles of the grasslands. Not only would they earn money, but they would also earn favors. Jinglin, as the son of a noble clan of the southern dynasty, did not have a good impression of these nobles of Biting. Over the past 20 years, there had been countless examples of minor nobles of Biting abusing their power in western capital of the southern dynasty. However, Jinglin still shook his head and said, "That 4,000 infantry is the old battalion of Yan Wenluan of Yuzhou. They are the direct descendants of the direct line of descent. We shouldn't rashly charge into their formation. General Zhong only asked me to cover their retreat. We can't be greedy and advance prematurely." That 1,000-man commander chuckled and said, "Whether or not I'm advancing prematurely will have to wait until I lose the battle. Every one of the 1,000 men under my command is an elite cavalry that can drill into the belly of a horse like playing with a toy. General Zheng, since you don't dare to charge into the formation, you can just wait on the side and watch me provide support." Jinglin said expressionlessly, "Oh, then this general will quietly wait for the report of victory." The young 1,000-man commander laughed out loud and took the lead to rush into the heavily guarded phalanx of infantry. 1,000 cavalrymen were divided into 2 rows of 200 cavalrymen. There was a large gap between the 5 rows. The first 2 rows were mainly composed of short and tall, heavy cavalrymen. Everyone was holding their original spears or iron spears seized from Beiliang's Fort Wu. Their armor was also better than that of the last 3 rows. Thus, they quickly advanced forward. This kind of cavalry charging formation that the grassland people were very familiar with. The formation was simple but flexible. At the end of the Dafeng dynasty, they had achieved great results against the Central Plains infantry, causing the Central Plains to be filled with smoke. Every time they were about to clash with the Central Plains infantry, the last 3 rows of light cavalrymen would suddenly speed up and charge out from the gaps between the iron cavalry. They would either shoot out a dense rain of arrows or throw out short spears. If the enemy's phalanx of infantry could maintain a stable formation, then the heavy cavalrymen would not rush into the formation. Instead, they would make an arc and slide out from the 2 wings of the phalanx. If they could not find an opportunity on the 2 sides of the phalanx of infantry, then they would return to their original spot and repeat until a hole appeared in the phalanx of infantry. Then, the iron cavalry would launch a truly lethal charge and create a gap for the light cavalry behind. In the past, the grassland cavalry that galloped freely on the territory of the Dafeng dynasty had greatly improved both their armor and weapons due to the various benefits that Hong Jiao brought to the north. Unfortunately, the enemy this 1,000-man cavalry was facing was the heavy armored infantry of Yan Wenluan, the Beiliang frontier army. It was not the embroidered pillow dynasty that was boasted by some rich and powerful people that all the dynasties died because they were weak. Only the Dafeng dynasty died because they were strong. When they realized that there were only 1,000 cavalry charging alone. This infantry square formation made a shocking move, going against the common sense of the art of war and putting down the shield wall and spear forest that were the essence of the horse-repelling formation. It was only between 300 and 100 steps. Under the sharp arrows of the large number of crossbows, the 1,000 cavalry that were shouting were thrown off their horses. A total of 600 of them lay down. What happened next was also completely different from what was written in the military books. The infantry formation didn't continue to fire arrows at a large scale. Instead, they shot down the dozens of mounted soldiers who tried to escape from the battlefield. The front line readied their shields and spears. It was like saying, "Cavalry charging formation. Then please come." After realizing that their 1,000-man commander had an arrow pierced through his chest, the remaining 300 Beimang cavalry charged over without caring about their lives. They charged towards those sharp horse-repelling spears. After one charge, the entire infantry square formation was still as stable as a rock. In front of the shield. In the spear. The 300 Beimang warhorses, without exception, were all pierced through by the 2.5-foot-long spears. On the walls of Shaoguang City, a short, one-eyed old man was accompanied by Yuzhou General Huang Fuqiong and Provincial Governor Hu Kuei, the two Beiliang border officials. From start to finish, the old man did not even glance at the 1,000 Beimang cavalry seeking their own death. Instead, he looked even further north, outside the gorge. He muttered to himself, "In 3 days, the 4 cavalry armies will be able to enter the gorge, right?" Outside the mouth of the calabash, the 20,000 Yuzhou cavalrymen were divided into 2. Commanding Cavalry General Shi Yulu and Agile Cavalry General Fan Wenyao each led 2,000 cavalrymen and continued north. They were in charge of destroying the grain transportation of Longyao province and intercepting those wandering cavalrymen. The Deputy General of the Yuzhou Cavalry, Yu Wandao, personally led 16,000 cavalry to welcome the arrival of the 2 cavalry armies. When the time came, the Yuzhou cavalry would act as guards for the latter. Even though the 2 cavalry armies added together only amounted to more than half of the Yuzhou cavalry. But Yu Wandao was not angry at all. 2 days later, a group of 10,000 cavalry broke away from the main army and charged into the gorge. There were dilapidated fortresses and unmanned beacons. It was a scene of devastation. A gust of wind blew past the city of Crouching Bao City. These 10,000 cavalry did not stop at Crouching Bao City. When they circled around the city, all the cavalry took out their Beiliang blades and raised them high up. The Great Snow Dragon Cavalry. They silently headed south. Chapter 1566. In the darkness of the night, a group of carriages quietly entered Liangzhou City and passed through the tightly guarded city gates without any obstructions. Mount Qingliang opened its e-gate, and the Northern Liang Prince's mansion opened its doors to welcome guests in a manner that was normally reserved for the emperor. There were 3 carriages. The white-robed monk's family of 3 and the little monk Nanbei sat in the first carriage. Master White Lotus of Mount Longhu, Baiyu, and Han Guiqing of Mount Qingshan Monastery of Mount Wudang sat in the second carriage. Chang Sui, Su Huang, and the others from Shangyin Academy sat in the last carriage. Su Weisheng led a large group of people out of Mount Qingliang to welcome the guests. Behind Song Dongming, the deputy administrator of Beiliang, stood a group of curious advisors. Song Dongming's official residence halfway up the mountain was known as the Dragon Gate of Beiliang. Su Fingnian's residence in Wutongan was known as the Phoenix Pavilion. It was clear that Song Dongming had an extraordinary position in Beiliang's officialdom. Only Li Dongbei and the little monk Nanbei could be counted as revisiting old haunts. Li Dongbei's eyes were sharp. She immediately spotted Song Yu, the chief steward of the prince's residence. She trotted over and greeted him warmly. Song Yu, who had been the steward of the Su family for most of his life, was also very happy to see this little girl. This rigid old man, who was privately called the cold-faced Yama by the officials of Liangzhou, actually squeezed out a smile for the first time. Probably because he was not used to greeting people with a smile, his face was slightly stiff. However, the old man still smiled and said that he would personally accompany Miss Li to the cosmetics store tomorrow. The little girl was very happy. Lu Qingyan and Wang Chudong did not show their faces in public. After all, the two girls were future princesses. It was not proper for them to go out and greet guests. Su Weisheng greeted the white-robed monk and Master White Lotus first, then walked to Chang Sui and the others. Chang Sui raised his empty wine gourd and shook it. He smiled and said, "Green ant wine, no more and no less. 1 pot a day. Junior sister, you have a big family business. This shouldn't be a problem, right?" Su Weisheng nodded and said, "Drinking is not a problem. Just don't go to Tide Hark Lake to drink in the middle of the night. If you fall into the water, you will be fed to the fish." Jean Baogu's eyes were red as she called out to her senior sister. Su Weisheng smiled gently and said, "It's only been a few years since we last met and you've already grown up. Do you want me to be your matchmaker?" Although the men of Beiliang are used to drinking the northwest wind and eating the yellow sand of the desert, and are not as well read as the scholars of the Central Plains, after interacting with them for a long time, you will know that they are more capable of shouldering burdens than the scholars of the Central Plains. Especially the men over there. They ride the best horses, carry the best sabers, drink the strongest wine, and kill the Baimang barbarians. I'm sure Junior Marshal Sister will like them. Jean Baosher grabbed Su Weisheng's hand and held it in her arms. She smiled coquettishly and said, "Senior sister, you're not married yet. Why should I be in a hurry?" Su Weisheng turned to greet Su Huang, Sima Kan, and Lu Duanmao. She did not say anything extra and just called them Senior Marshal Brother and Junior Marshal Brother. The white-robed monk stood next to his wife and watched as Bai Yu and Song Dongming hit it off at first sight. One was a Taoist immortal who was highly regarded by the late emperor, the other was a scholar who had a high chance of becoming an important official in the imperial court. These two were among the few scholars in the entire Liang dynasty. They chatted happily. But when Li Dongxin recalled the secret conversation about Leader Zhao on Mount Wudong, the white-robed monk felt a little tired. He sighed softly and no longer paid attention to Bai Yu and Song Dongming's conversation. After entering the palace, he looked around at the scenery. In the early years of the Liang dynasty, there was a saying, "Millions of families have suffered, but one family has become rich." In other words, the Su family, who occupied a mountain and sat on Tide Listening Lake, wantonly collected the wealth of the people in Beiliang. Their wealth was comparable to that of a country. Soon, the aides of the Dragon Gate lined up to Li Dongxin. Probably because the deputy administrator had warned them beforehand, these Beiliang officials who had admired the white-robed monk for a long time did not dare to open their mouths and talk about their daily lives. They all respectfully introduced themselves and at most added a few compliments. The white-robed monk smiled and nodded in return. The latter did not think that the abbot of the two Zen temples was putting on airs. Everyone knew that when the white-robed monk returned to Taiyan City after traveling thousands of miles to the west, he only put his palms together and saluted the emperor who personally led the horse for him. He did not even turn over and dismount from the horse. This group of officials who had leaped over the northern Liang Dragon Gate had already achieved a certain level of attainment in the official field, hence they did not want to give the Wudang Mountain's great Jinren Han Gui the cold shoulder. Very sincerely, they asked for advice on the Taoist school's health maintenance technique. Forget about other things, Han Gui, who had the highest chance of becoming the next Wudang sect leader, could not be considered cold shoulder anymore. In the future, he would be a minister of the same rank as the Six Ministries minister, who would dare to slight him. In addition to the white-robed monk and his wife who led the chief butler Song Yu to a house to stay, the East and West girls and the North and South monks had already left the group and wandered around with familiarity. Along the way, she could accurately call out the names of the maids she met. She also had an elder sister. The clever maids of Mount Qingliang certainly remembered this little girl clearly. She was someone who was doted on by His Royal Highness as his own sister. The little girl had a good temper, so it was hard not to like her. Bai Yu and Chang Sui followed Su Weisheng and Song Dongming to the unique official residence halfway up the mountain. Although it was called the Deputy Administrator's residence, it was actually a continuous series of short courtyards. A deputy administrator and more than 30 assistant officials dealt with government affairs and basic necessities of life here. Those Dragon Gate officials, who were like the male servants of the Liang imperial court, sensibly dispersed and went back to their own homes. They continued to deal with the affairs gathered from the governor's mansions of the 3 provinces of Beiliang. In the last room, except for Su Weisheng, who was in a wheelchair, Song Dongming, who was an important minister of the border area and had to be admitted by the Liang imperial court, Bai Yu and Chang Sui, who were temporarily in Mount Qingliang as the top guests of the prince's mansion, Su Huang, who was a master of the art of war who was about to go to Huayang Pass, Sima Kan, who was already the governor of Taiyu County in Lingzhou, Lu Duanmao, who was about to enter the governor's mansion of Lingzhou as an assistant to Su Beiji, and Jin Baoshi, who wanted to enter Wutong'an, all sat down. Chapter 1567. Su Weisheng went straight to the point. Just as Mr. White Lotus predicted, the situation on the Western Front is extremely unfavorable to our Beiliang. His Highness has already personally headed to Liuzhou. According to the latest reports from our spies during the day, all the cavalry stationed in Liangzhou have received the order and are moving out urgently. However, apart from the 2 units of 6,000 cavalry that were originally stationed in the western part of Liangzhou, they only need to wait where they are and do not need to travel long distances. Apart from the 1,000 Horned Eagle cavalry led by Luo Hongkai who was near Mount Wudong, and the 2 captains who passed by later, a total of 2,300 cavalry, the fastest unit of Liangzhou cavalry will arrive at the border between Liangzhou and Liuzhou one day after His Highness. The slowest will take 4 days, and this is under the premise that they completely disregard the horse's stamina. Because the Tianjing horse farm in Beiliang is only second to the Xianli horse farm in scale, and it just so happens that it is not far from where His Highness is located, they are able to transfer 600 A-grade warhorses and 4,000 B-grade warhorses. This is probably the only good news we have. Su Weisheng paused for a moment, then said with a grave expression, "To tell you the truth, Wang Sui has already led 50,000 cavalry to easily take down Ji Bei and Heng Shui. This elite cavalry that is confronting the Liangyang Liao is currently heading for the eastern gate of Yuzhou. Their goal is to cooperate with Yang Yuanzhan's army in the gourd mouth, attempting to destroy half of Yuzhou in one go." Su Huang slowly asked, "Even if Great General Yan Wenluan's Yuzhou infantry were to send a unit north to reinforce Xiaoguang City, given that Yuzhou already has 30,000 cavalry, it wouldn't be too difficult for them to simultaneously defend the last line of defense at the gourd mouth and the eastern border, right?" Su Weisheng smiled bitterly. "It was originally like this, but we encountered 2 whimsical leaders. Under their insistence, not only were the 30,000 Yuzhou cavalry sent north from River Province to the gourd mouth, even the 10,000 Great Snow Dragon cavalry and 2 heavy cavalry units left their garrisons and rushed to the gourd mouth. As a result, not only is Liangzhou's Huda city in a critical situation, the rear areas of Huayang Pass and Liuya Fuling are practically empty. In addition, the cavalry in Liang province is rushing to Lu province to put out the fire. Once Hudi's city falls, Liang province will be in an unimaginable and terrifying situation. The two deputy commanders of cavalry, He Zhonghu and Zhou Kong, as well as the deputy commander of infantry, Great Ancestor Gu, do not have enough soldiers to support the situation of Hudi's city being lost. Therefore, the other deputy commander of infantry, Qin Yinxue, has already led 30,000 elite infantry to Liangzhou. Su Huang's expression changed slightly as he began to quickly calculate the gains and losses in his mind. Chang Sui's wine gourd was already filled to the brim with green ant wine. Song Dongming sat upright, while Baiyu narrowed his eyes. No one knew what he was thinking. Su Weisheng sternly said, "Right now, we can only hope that Lu province will not lose and that Huaiyang Pass cannot be lost. This way, Beiliang will be able to smoothly engage in an encirclement and annihilation of an unprecedented scale. Otherwise, even if Huaiyang Pass falls, let alone Huaiyang Pass, we won't be able to endure a one-for-one trade between Beiliang's Lu province and Beimang's Gourd Pass. In the end, Beiliang is only using the strength of one land to fight against the strength of one country. Beimang can afford a war of attrition, but we can't." Su Huang softly said, "In this case, whether or not your highness's reinforcements from Liang province can change the situation in Lu province is of utmost importance. Whether or not Protector General Chu can protect Hudi's city and Huaiyang Pass Liuya Fuling as the first line of defense on Beiliang's border is of utmost importance. Whether or not Commander Yuan and the Yuzhou cavalry can block and finish off the army of more than 200,000 soldiers in the Gourd Pass is of utmost importance." Su Huang repeated the three words of utmost importance. This meant that if Beiliang wanted to win this shocking gamble, they had to do it step by step. There could not be any major mistakes in each step, otherwise they would lose everything. Chang Sui wiped away the wine at the corner of his mouth, asking with a smile, "Then I'll only ask about the battlefield that Beiliang has the most confidence in." At the Gourd Pass, Yuan's Wazong's Great Snow Dragon Cavalry, those two heavy cavalry that have disappeared for 20 years, and the Yuzhou cavalry of Tianheng and Yuandao. Just how confident are they that they can capture that old turtle Yang Yuanzan? Su Weisheng smiled and extended a hand. Chang Sui rubbed his chin, saying regretfully, "Only 50%, then it's difficult. I have to think of a way out for myself. Otherwise, before this chair under my butt of Mount Qingliang has even warmed up, I might be able to hear the hoofbeats of the Beimang barbarians." Su Weisheng once again slowly flipped his palm. The corners of Baiyu's lips curled up. Chang Sui stared. "Junior sister Su, are you playing with me?" Su Weisheng smiled. Although the number of soldiers blocking the Gourd Pass is not many, for better or for worse, it's almost half of what my father has accumulated for most of his life. If they still can't win, then where does Beiliang's confidence come from to confront Beimang's million-strong army? Chang Sui suddenly laughed. "Why don't I go to Xiaoguang City in Yuzhou right now, and junior sister let me command a heavy cavalry?" Su Weisheng laughed coldly. "Senior brother, if you can stop drinking, then I'll agree." Chang Sui said resentfully, "Then forget it." Su Huang suddenly frowned. "I heard that Beimang has also spared no effort in building two heavy cavalry units named after the two surnames of Yelu and Murong." Su Weisheng said softly, "It has nothing to do with the Gourd Pass. We just received a report from a spy at the border that one of them has already rushed to the Liuzhou border. This is where Lu Gui's confidence in wiping out the 30,000 dragon elephant cavalry lies." The entire room sunk into silence. Baiyu, who had not interjected all this time, shook his head with a bitter smile. Jean Bauscher was stunned for a moment. He couldn't help but ask, even if the cavalry reinforcements from Liangzhou can arrive in time, will they still be of any use? Su Weisheng said helplessly, "If it were up to me, I'd just do my best and leave the rest to fate." Everyone in the room fell silent once more. For some reason, Su Weisheng smiled happily without any trace of dejection. However, if it were a certain fellow, he definitely wouldn't think this way. He would only say, losing is better than admitting defeat. Whether it's okay or not, let's talk after the fight. Lianzhou's Tiger Head City, inside the Gourd Pass, outside Qingcang City, Liuzhou's eastern border. Bai Liang was fighting on all four fronts. Chapter 1568. Actually, this chapter is only one of the 3 chapters one originally planned to write. The other 2 chapters are about the movements in Liao Province and the Battle of Liuzhou. However, I definitely can't finish it today. I'm only halfway through the 2nd chapter. In order to keep updating, I have to upload it first. In the western capital of the Southern Dynasty, there was a mansion of a wealthy family whose threshold was so high that a child had to climb over it. The gate was as busy as a marketplace, and carriages and horses were like dragons. The guests were all here to congratulate the old master of this house for becoming a centenarian. In the entire western capital, there were only a few people who had lived to this age, and there was no one else who had such a good reputation as the old master. Even the big shots in the western capital who had lived to the age of 70 didn't know the real name of this centenarian. They all called him Old Wang, and the younger ones could only call him Old Master Wang. The Wang family was one of the big families of the Southern Dynasty. Although the descendants of the Wang family who were 2 generations younger than Old Master Wang didn't amount to much, and they only had 1 assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights and 2 military town captains, and 2 of them were dead now, but fortunately, Old Master Wang's great-grandson was very capable. He climbed all the way from the bottom of the Beimang army and became one of the 4 Jinzhou of the king's tent with real military achievements. Now that he married a noble from Longguan, the entire family's trend could be said to be thriving day by day. Today's birthday celebration wasn't harmonious from the beginning to the end. As the local tyrant of Beimang's southern dynasty, the Longguan noble family's internal affairs were complicated. There were marriages and feuds. Some people didn't get along with the Wang family, a big family from the Jia family who became in-laws with the Wang family. Today was Old Master Wang's 100th birthday, and he was also implicated. Someone openly sent a piece of calligraphy that only had the 4 words, "Live a long life." Even the guests who came to visit couldn't stand this kind of unscrupulous slap in the face. However, Old Master Wang actually took the calligraphy with a smile and didn't forget to ask the housekeeper to give the servant who sent the calligraphy a piece of silver for the celebration. After all, Old Master Wang was a centenarian and couldn't entertain guests for too long. After greeting some important ministers and family friends of the western capital, he handed the task to his nephew who had been the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights for 16 years to entertain the guests. The old man returned to the quiet courtyard to rest. The courtyard wasn't small, and there were dozens of extremely rare plum trees. Old Master Wang called himself Wild Plum Forest Elder. In this noisy dusk, Old Master Wang asked the servants in the courtyard to move a rattan chair under the plum tree. With the careful support of a pretty maid, he lay down on the chair that was cushioned with a soft Sichuan brocade. The maid didn't dare to leave. She sat on a small bench according to the old rules. She respected this unimaginably good-tempered old man very much. Since she entered the courtyard as a maid, she had never seen Old Master Wang angry. She clearly remembered that when she first came to the courtyard, one day she was sitting in the inner room and watching Old Master Wang take an afternoon nap. Someone outside the room accidentally broke a teacup, and the old man, who was a light sleeper, immediately woke up. She was scared to death. She didn't expect Old Master Wang to just smile and wave his hand at her after waking up, indicating that she should pretend that she didn't know anything. Later, she heard that someone in the courtyard had neglected their duty in the early years. One winter, several plum trees froze to death in the plum forest. The entire Wang family was furious and wanted to use the family law. 100 lashes, and the person's life was naturally gone. It was Old Master Wang who spoke. He said that there were many valuable things in the world, but there was nothing more valuable than a person's life. If the trees were gone, then they were gone. It didn't matter. In any case, he wouldn't be able to see the new plum trees turn old in this lifetime. It was good to see the withered plum trees. The old man lay quietly on the chair and looked at the plum trees that were not luxuriant. He slowly said, "Little girl Chamie, summer is almost over. In my hometown, there is a period of time called the plum rain season. Because when it rains, it is when the plum trees in Jiangnan are yellow and yellow, so it is called plum rain. It is a very nice way of saying it, isn't it? If you aren't a scholar, you won't be able to think of such a name. When I was young, I often recited some proverbs that I heard from my elders. I didn't understand the reason, but it was easy to say. When the peach blossom water is exhausted, it must be the yellow plum tree in drought. When the rain hits the yellow plum tree's head, there will be no sun for 45 days. Now that I recite it, I feel that it is easy to say." The maid asked curiously in a soft voice, "Old master, why do you like plum trees so much?" The old man, who was too lazy to chat with others, took a deep breath and said with a smile, "In my hometown, there are all kinds of things to pay attention to. Some are interesting, some are boring. Not only are people divided into different classes, even the flowers are no exception. For example, crazy catkins, frivolous peach blossoms, and this plum blossom's strength of character." The maid, who had been poor since childhood and was not very literate, whispered, "Strength of character." Old Master Wang smiled and said, "When a scholar writes poetry, his words are correct and he is in high spirits. That is why he is known as having strength of character." Then the strength of character of a scholar is probably what sage Zhang of the Confucian school said, "If you are poor, you should take care of yourself. If you are rich, you should help the world." This is very difficult. I just want to do it well, but I can't. However, there is one thing that I can do better than many people. Some people don't have a backbone, so they can't bear to see others have strength of character. Not only do they not feel ashamed of their inferiority, but they also spit and even make trouble for others. As for me, at the very least, I still have the mind to emulate others. The little maid scratched her head quietly. She was in a daze and didn't quite understand. Probably tired from talking, the old man began to close his eyes and rest. At this moment, the sound of footsteps came from the courtyard. The maidservant hurriedly turned her head to look and was stunned. Not only was Master Wang, who had been the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rites but had never been able to become the head of the Wang family, but when he entered the courtyard, he had been smiling slightly with his back bent. He was half a step behind the two unfamiliar men. When the maidservant raised her eyes to look, she couldn't move her eyes away. This was because the youngest girl among the three was simply too beautiful. When the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rites, Wang Xianling, approached the rattan chair, he slightly quickened his pace and whispered to the old man who seemed to be asleep, "The crown prince is here." The old man opened his eyes and was just about to get up with the help of Wang Xianling and the maid, Chai Mi, when the tall man in the prime of his life hurriedly said with a smile, "Old Master Wang, you don't have to be so polite. Just lie down." Yelu Hongkai came empty-handed this time. He was in the wrong and rude. It is fortunate that old master doesn't blame him. Although the trembling assistant minister of the Ministry of Rites had already received a signal from the Crown Prince of Beimang, he still couldn't dissuade the old man's insistence. After the latter stood up, he very laboriously but respectfully bowed. The Crown Prince, who was secretly visiting the Wang family mansion, said helplessly, "Old master, you are making Yellow Hongkai feel ashamed. Sit, quickly sit." The old man tried his best to sit upright on the rattan chair. Wang Xianling and the maid in the small courtyard each brought over a yellow rosewood chair. When the assistant minister saw that the beautiful woman actually sat down almost at the same time as the crown prince, his eyelids suddenly twitched. The crown prince of Beimang, who had rushed back to the west capital from the battlefield of Huda City, said pleasantly, "Old master, you are famous for your essays. You are a pure gentleman that even His Majesty praises endlessly. This time, I suddenly heard that it was your 100th birthday and hurried over. At the moment, I couldn't come up with a suitable birthday gift, so I had to come empty-handed. I will definitely make up for it later. I hope Old Master will be magnanimous enough to forgive me. The old man laughed heartily and said, "This old man is honored by your highness, honored by this old man." Chapter 1569. Wang Xianling heaved a sigh of relief when he saw that the old master, who had become less talkative over the years, was in a good mood and did not become muddle-headed. He thought that it was true that having an old man in the family was like having a treasure. Judging from the situation, he could only stand now. Was there a chance for him to sit on the minister's seat? Even though Yelu Hongkai wasn't well received by those grassland great generals in Northern Mang royal court, not many of Northern Mang's most authoritative great generals and edicts clearly expressing their support for him, in the end, this person was still the rightful first in line to the throne. Among the Southern Dynasty remnant people who attached the most importance to orthodoxy, there were still quite a few nobles who thought highly of Yelu Hongkai. In the past, the two previous great kings of the Northern and Southern dynasties, Huang Songpu and Su Huainan, were actually extremely close to this crown prince who had a gentle nature. However, following Su Huainan's sudden death and Huang Songpu's resignation, as well as the rise of Dong Zhuo, Hong Jinyan, Zhong Tan, this group of robust young generals, Yelu Hongkai became more and more low-key. Wang Xianling, who was standing quietly on the side and holding his breath, was certainly not stupid. The reason why the crown prince came quietly this time was partly because of Wang Jingchong's identity as Dongjubo, and partly because his old master had a prestige that could not be underestimated among the survivors of the Southern dynasty. This was especially the case after the Wang clan and the Great clan were connected through marriage. This was equivalent to touching the true core of the Southern dynasty, unlike those ordinary, great clans who appeared to be well off on the surface and had people serving as assistant ministers and generals, but in reality, they were just a bunch of parasites attached to the Longwan clan. For a moment, Wang Xianling had mixed feelings. The land under his feet, the Merlin courtyard, the Wang family's mansion, the entire western capital, and even the entire southern dynasty were all specially opened up by the vigorous old lady Murong for Hong Jiao and the survivors of the spring and autumn period. Except for the bloody massacre that happened inexplicably years ago, where many peach trees that were moved from the central plains to the southern dynasty were cut down, which made people tremble in fear, Empress Murong could be said to be quite protective of the survivors of the southern dynasty. Some big families of the Norland went south to pick a fight, and afterwards, they would be punished by the Yellow King. Perhaps it was not too heavy, but it definitely could not be said that it was not painful or itchy. It was just like the Wang family that Wang Xianling belonged to. Although it was not a big family in the Central Plains, it was still a member of the Hanlin Academy for 10 generations. However, it was still an exile thousands of miles away from its hometown. It was even worse than a homeless dog rolling in the mud for food. How could it have imagined that it would return to being a court official in the Southern Dynasty wearing a yellow and purple court robe? Yelu Hongcai's face suddenly turned gloomy. He said in a low voice, "Old master, I also heard about the calligraphy just now. The second family of Longguan is really unreasonable. When I return to the Grassland King's tent, I will definitely talk to His Majesty about this in person. There is no reason for old master to be wronged like this." The old man smiled and waved his hand gently. It's okay. Not to mention the meaning of this calligraphy, just the words alone can be said to be worth 1,000 gold in our southern dynasty. Although there is no signature, it is obviously written by Yu Liang, one of the 4 calligraphy masters in the world today. I still have a good eyesight. It is indeed worthy of the title. The strokes are like dragon claws that appear in the clouds and are full of the aura of gold and stone. If it was not that soldier advisor who was admired by the literary circle of Liang, no one could have written such an artistic conception. Besides, it is not easy for me to live to this age, so it is time for me to take advantage of my seniority. Naturally, many things can be treated as a child's babble and dismissed with a laugh, just a laugh. There are many ancient poems and books that say a person's life is less than 100 years. This but is really accurate. Even if I can't get over it, what does it matter? So, Your Highness, don't worry about this matter. It is better to use it as a topic of conversation after a meal than to get angry. Hearing the old man's words, the arrogant woman also seemed a little surprised. For the first time, she looked at the old master of the Wang family seriously. Yelu Hongkai laughed heartily. The god of longevity is the most important. I will listen to old master. While the old man smiled, he quietly glanced at Wang Xianling. The latter was an old man in his 60s, but in front of the old master, he was still like a child who made a mistake. He immediately panicked and said, "It's not that I am talkative," Yelu Hongkai helped to explain. "Old master, it has nothing to do with Assistant Minister Wang. I heard it myself." The old man smiled. "In this courtyard, Your Highness is the most important. I will listen to Your Highness." Yelu Hongkai smiled knowingly. It seemed like a simple joke, but it made the crown prince swallow back many of the drafts he had prepared. Since the fire was strong enough, adding more firewood would be as bad as falling short. He chatted with the old man about poetry, calligraphy, and painting, but didn't mention anything about military affairs. Yelu Hongkai saw that the old master was unable to hide his fatigue, so he got up to leave. Of course, he wouldn't let the old man get up to see him off. Assistant Minister Wang, who had been watching the minister for many years, accompanied him out of the courtyard. The maid named Chai Mi secretly patted her chest. So it was the crown prince who came in person. She really couldn't tell. He didn't put on any airs at all. The old master of the Wang family, who had returned to his rattan chair, closed his eyes and leisurely patted the chair's armrest with one hand. Chai Mi tiptoed to fetch a round fan and gently fanned it for the old master. As the breeze caressed his face, the summer heat, which wasn't heavy to begin with, became even lighter. A smile appeared on the old man's face as he muttered to himself, calmly sitting in the mountains and seas, pinching the world for 1,000 years. The maid didn't dare to speak. She only sincerely hoped that this century-old man could live another 100 years. The old man fell silent. After some time, he said, "Chai Mi, if your hand is tired, don't fan." The maid smiled and said, "Old master, don't worry. This servant can still fan for a while." The old master of the Wang family said softly, "Since I'm in good spirits today, I'll talk to my daughter more." The maid asked cautiously, "Old master, aren't you tired?" The old man smiled and said, "I still don't feel tired." The maid secretly glanced at the entrance of the courtyard. "Then old master, please speak. This servant is listening." The old man slowly said, "Little girl, let me tell you. In the future, it's best not to marry a scholar, especially one with talent. If he's too talented, it's easy for him to use it on many women. His mind is the most erratic, and he can't stop on one woman. This year, he'll be whispering sweet nothings to each other. Maybe next year, he'll be with another woman. If you want to marry an honest man, it's not that there aren't honest scholars. There are, but there are too few. Take me, this old man, for example. When I was young, I was such a heartless scholar. By the time I truly calm down, it'll be too late." The young girl stopped fanning and covered her mouth to hide her laughter. The old man smiled and said, "You don't believe me. If you don't listen to your elders, you'll suffer." The young girl hurriedly said, I believe." The old man joked, "You answered so quickly. It's obvious that you didn't take it seriously. Little girl, you still don't believe." The young girl wrinkled her little face. The old man shook his wrist. Go back to your room and rest. Let this old man be alone for a while. You can come back in 2 hours. The young girl grunted and took a small stool to sit under the eaves. It was neither too far nor too close. She couldn't hear the old man's words, but she could clearly see the plum tree and the rattan chair. In fact, the old man wasn't talking to himself. He just looked a little sad. In the blink of an eye, his old country was gone. In the blink of an eye, his teacher and close friends had passed away. In the blink of an eye, he had been in a foreign country for 20 years. In the blink of an eye, he was 100 years old. Then the young girl was shocked to see a scene. The old man tried to stand up as if he knew that she was going to help. The old man didn't turn his head and waved his hand at her. The old man stood up with difficulty and looked up at the branches and leaves of the plum tree in a daze. The old man smiled. Mr. Li, Mr. Nalen. I, Wang Du, haven't lost the strength of the scholars of the Central Plains. Chapter 1570. Watching the fire from the other side became playing with fire. This was the best description of the defense line at Liang North Pass. As the gateway to Ji Bay, Silver Sparrow Hawk and Horizontal Water both fell at the same time. Beimang's 50,000 cavalry pointed at the south, causing everyone in Jizhou to feel threatened. For a moment, the imperial court in the capital was bustling. Some people suggested that the left assistant minister of the Ministry of War, Su Gong, should take over the position left by Tang Taizuang and assist Gu Jiantang in handling the military affairs in the north. Others suggested that Jiaodong's Prince Xiao Sui, who was in charge of Liaoxi, should reinforce Liaoxi and force the 50,000 cavalry to return to the east to prevent the situation in Jizhou from deteriorating completely. There were also people who accused Jizhou's General Yuan Tingshan of not managing the situation properly, causing the flames of war to spread in Ji Bay. He could not take up the heavy responsibility and should let the Deputy General Han Fang take charge of the military affairs in Jizhou. When the west line of Guangling Road was deployed by Xia Shi, not only did they successfully stop the 100,000 southern border troops that had already crossed the river, they even sent a group of soldiers to attack a dangerous pass on the south bank of Guangling River, causing the southern border troops to have no place to advance or retreat. Under the pressure of West Chu's navy, the southern border infantry and Qingzhou navy almost shrunk into a ball and retreated. Under such an urgent situation, the civil and military officials of Great Peace City became more and more worried. They finally could not stand the Tuliao border troops not moving. The Beimang barbarians were attacking the northwest with all their might. Gu Jiantang did not move at all. However, even the east line of Beimang that he was keeping an eye on ran to Jizhou. Obviously, they wanted to bypass the Tuliao border defense lines that cost half the country's taxes to build. They wanted to use Jizhou, which was empty due to the absence of Ji Nan's old soldiers, as a breakthrough point for the south to enter the Central Plains. How could General Gu not do anything? Are you not afraid that Beimang's 50,000 cavalry will attack the west of Jingji? Although you, Gu Jiantang, are the only remaining pillar of the dynasty, your heart is really too big, isn't it? There was a town called Taiping near the border of Jizhou in Liaodong. Most of the residents in the town were from the border army, and some of them were officials who were exiled by the imperial court. Occasionally, there would be traveling merchants passing through the town, and they would do some small business on the way. In the past 4 to 5 years, the cheap and good green ant wine was in high demand here. Unfortunately, after Gu Jiantang left his post as the Minister of War, he held the title of Pillar of the country and served as the governor of the Tuliao provinces. The border army knew that General Gu did not get along with the Beimang, so the green ant wine produced in Beimang was not sold by many merchants these years. Although Taiping town was small, it had all the essentials. There were 3 to 4 restaurants, and even a proper brothel. There were even more private prostitutes in the small kills. The generals of the border army also turned a blind eye to this. It was better to let it go than to block it. The Liaodong border army was known as the stabilizing force of the Liang dynasty. They were all young and strong men. However, they had been in a stalemate with the Baimang barbarians for many years. They had always lived in peace and rarely fought with each other. How could the soldiers of the border army vent their anger? Could they find other men for other men? Therefore, small towns like Taiping Town sprung up like bamboo shoots after a spring rain. Some of the generals of the border army who had a lot of connections had the ability to buy young women from the areas around the capital and even the Central Plains and the Jiangnan area. They could bring hundreds of people to the two Liao provinces at one time. In Taiping Town, Changshou Restaurant was the most popular restaurant. It was the private property of a military officer with real power. Except for the green ant wine, almost all the famous Liang wine, such as Jiannan Chun, could be bought here as long as you had money. There were all kinds of women playing music and singing in the restaurant all year round. Their appearances were nothing more than average. However, it was a rare scene in the remote border. In the past 2 days, a pair of brother and sister came to Changshou Restaurant. The young woman held a pipa and told stories. The older brother was responsible for shouting and collecting money. This was not strange at all. However, the woman kept telling stories about the king of Beiliang, Su Fengnian. She told stories about how Su Fengnian walked across the Liang River Lake, how he entered Baimang alone, and how he won the hearts of the soldiers in Beiliang. This angered the residents of Taiping Town. However, a group of people took the opportunity to bully the beautiful woman. They did not expect to be beaten by the ordinary-looking young man. Changshou Restaurant was happy to see this happen. They proposed that the woman be allowed to tell stories in the restaurant. They wanted her brother to fight in the arena every day. After 10 days, all the military experts near Taiping Town lost. The young man from outside won 10 rounds in a row. The Changshou Restaurant, which was good at making money, started to become the banker again. It was estimated that they earned at least 1,000 taels of silver. The prostitution business in the brothels in the town decreased sharply. In the evening, the battle in Changshou Restaurant was over. A group of distinguished guests walked into the restaurant. The 4 of them asked for a table by the railing on the 2nd floor. The woman downstairs was preparing for the 2nd round of storytelling. Her brother had changed into a new set of clothes that were washed to the point of turning white. They were mended very hard. The brother and sister had traveled from Liangzhou to Lingzhou, and then from Lingzhou to Hezhou. They passed through Jizhou and arrived at this small town. Unlike the blind storytellers commonly seen in Liang, the woman only had a pipa. When she was telling a story, she never shook her head, laughed, or cursed. When she talked about the character's sorrows or the intense emotions, she only raised her voice slightly. Most of the time, she spoke in a flat tone, as if she was just telling a story. As for whether the audience liked to hear it or not, and whether they were willing to reward her, she didn't care at all. The 4 guests sitting by the railing on the 2nd floor ordered a jar of Jiannan Chun wine, which was known as 1 catty can break the throat and 2 catties can burn the intestines. They also ordered a jar of ancient Immortal brew, which was easy to drink and had a small after effect. Only 2 of the 4 people sat down. The younger one had a simple and unadorned long saber on his waist. He looked around with self-satisfaction and was in high spirits. The man who looked like the elder of the young man had an indifferent expression. After opening the jar of Immortal brew, he drank by himself. The other 2 standing had 2 Liao border army standard war blades hanging from their waists. Although they didn't have the same status as the 2 seated here, others could tell with a single glance that they were extraordinary figures who led troops all year round. Otherwise, the aura of the battlefield on their bodies wouldn't be so strong. The young man stretched his neck and glanced at the people downstairs. He was a little impatient and frowned. Why isn't that G guy here yet? Looking at his posture, he really thinks that he's one of the top 10 masters in Great Snow Plateau. The older man with gray hair on his temples did not bat an eyelid. A burly man who was standing seemed to dislike this arrogant young man. He said with a fake smile, "General Yuan, Ji Lu, and is one of the top 10 masters in Great Snow Plateau of Mount Hui. What's there to be proud of?" The young man called General Yuan drank a mouthful of liquor and sneered, "Only a country bumpkin would take a martial arts evaluation made by a little girl seriously. In the end, only the old master of the Wu family's sword tomb can barely be called a master. As for the others, Chai Ching Shan of the sword pool of Dongyue has little ability. It's fine if he can shut himself up in Guangling Taoism. As for this palace master of Nanjiang Dragon Palace who sneaked into Liaodong, who is he?" The young man slowly spun the wine cup with 2 fingers. He glanced at the person who exposed him and said with a smile, "There's also that number 1 master of Nanzhao, Wei Miao, and the others. When they reach the Jianghu of the Central Plains, they will probably be beaten to a pulp. There's also that number 1 swordsman of Great Peace City, Qi Jiajie. He's the funniest. Flying swords for thousands of miles, what a great lineup." What happened in the end? The swords did reach Hizhou, but there's no more news of Qi Jiajie. Of these top 10 masters, even if the other 5 were added together, they would probably not be worthy of any one of the 4 people in the martial arts evaluation. The burly man was about to retort when his colleague pulled his sleeve. In the end, he swallowed his words and only snorted coldly. Chapter 1571. The young man didn't continue to criticize. Instead, he turned his head and looked at a middle-aged man 2 tables away. The man was wearing a short-sleeved shirt with a green headband wrapped around his head. His calves were wrapped in leggings. He would only be mistaken as a mountain man who often walked the mountain roads. However, there was an extremely coquettish and plump woman sitting beside him. Her clothes were gorgeous, but it was not the brocade and satin of the rich families in Liyang. Instead, it was tie-dyed and colorful. It was hard not to be eye-catching. It was clearly the Miao people's attire from the 100,000 mountains in the southwest. The plump woman had a string of silver bells on her hands and feet. When she raised her hands or feet, it made a pleasant sound. On the table beside her was a crescent-shaped knife with a snow-white scabbard. When she drank, one of her legs was casually placed on the bench. If one looked at her from the side, her slender thighs and round buttocks were extremely attractive. The woman also noticed the young man's gaze. She smiled charmingly and drank the whole cup of wine in one gulp. She raised her eyebrows provocatively at the young man. The young man put down the wine cup and made a gesture of holding something heavy in front of his chest. The plump woman was teased. Instead of being annoyed, she laughed like a flower. In front of the man beside her, she pushed the wine jar on the table with her palm. The wine jar moved like rolling thunder and hit the young man's back in an instant. The latter did not seem to move, but the wine jar deviated from its trajectory and brushed past him. It just happened to spin on the table and then gradually stopped. The woman laughed with a clumsy Central Plains official's accent. "You look good. As long as you drink, I'll be your friend." The burly man who did not get along with the young man reminded softly, "This Miao couple is not ordinary Jianghu masters. The woman has already done something to the wine jar. The Miao people's goo is very strange and impossible to guard against. It's best not to touch it." At this moment, 2 people came upstairs. One looked like an old Confucian in a green robe. The other had 2 long and short swords hanging from his waist. Just by looking at the 2 scabbards, one could tell that they were precious swords. The man who had not interrupted and was about to raise his cup to drink gently put down the wine cup. The 2 people who were standing slightly separated to make way. The 2 guests who came as promised sat on the same bench. The old Confucian scholar looked respectful and said softly, "I am Qing Baishuang from the countryside of southern border. Greetings to de Zhuguo." The famous swordsman with a cold expression also said, Dragon Palace Ji Lu, and is honored to meet de Zhuguo. After the death of the old Prince Liang, Su Shao, there was only one pillar of the country in the whole world. It was Gu Jiantang, who held half of the Tiger Seal military power in the Zhaoshi dynasty. Gu Jiantang smiled and nodded. It must have been hard for the two of you to come to Liaodong from the southern border. After the two top masters of Nanjiang Taoism sat down, the couple also got up and walked over to sit on the only empty bench. The burly man behind de Zhuguo who looked like a door god wanted to stop them, but Gu Jiantang had already picked up the wine jar with the poisonous insect. The general, who became the commander of Liaodong's Duo Yen cavalry after Tang Taizuang, quickly loosened his 5 fingers from the hilt of his sword. The woman first gave the young general surnamed Yuan a coquettish look, and then smiled at Gu Jiantang. My husband doesn't know how to speak your Central Plains language, so a woman like me is here to discuss important matters. General, please forgive me. Cheng Baishuang frowned and then relaxed in an instant. He asked with a smile, de Zhuguo, this is. Gu Jiantang didn't say anything. Aside from the young man beside him, he poured a bowl of wine for Cheng Baishuang, Ji Lu and the couple. At the same time, the young man who was ignored interrupted, Cheng Baishuang, Ji Lu and, what's wrong? My father-in-law is personally welcoming you, and you don't want to accept my toast. You want to drink as a punishment. Ji Lu, who was not in a good mood, narrowed his eyes. He had traveled thousands of li to Taiping town. Cheng Baishuang calmly picked up the wine bowl, shook his head, and said with a smile, of course not. I'm just curious. Probably because she was sitting so close to Gu Jiantang, the woman put away her coquettish look and went straight to the point. My husband is called Wei Miao. He is somewhat famous in Nanzhao. Of course, he can't compare to Palace Master Ji and Sir Qing. Originally, he would never set foot in the Central Plains, but there is no other way. The King of Shu and Sir Xia have spoken, so we have to make a trip. Gu Jiantang only had one daughter, so de Zhuguo's son-in-law could only be Ji Zhou's general, Yuan Tingshan. Yuan Tingshan originally wanted to tease the woman, but unfortunately, he heard the storyteller downstairs talking about the young king's surname Su who traveled to Mount Hui. Yuan Tingshan, who had an irreconcilable enmity with Su, sneered and suddenly stood up. With one hand on the railing, he fiercely slammed into the storyteller's brother like a bolt of lightning. The young man, who had won 11 battles in Taiping town, crossed his arms in front of his chest, but he was still kicked by Yuan Tingshan. His slightly trembling hands put his elbows on a wine table. As a result, the entire table was flipped over. The wine and food splashed all over the man's body. The clothes he had just changed into were also affected. Yuan Tingshan stood on the spot and didn't follow up with another attack. He only laughed, not bad. You've hidden yourself quite well. You're almost at the 2nd grade master realm. No wonder you're so powerful in this small town. I'm confused. The brother of a Beiliang storyteller. I think he's a master from Beiliang's Fushui room, right? Did he come here to spy on the military situation? That ordinary woman who was just a storyteller stared blankly for a moment. The young and taciturn man turned around and gave her an apologetic smile. Then, he nodded and then shook his head. The smile on Yuan Tingshan's face became wider. However, the ruthlessness in his eyes and the killing intent all over his body made everyone in the restaurant tremble with fear. The young man, whose real identity was a Beiliang spy, said in a deep voice, "It has nothing to do with Ariu. She's just a storyteller. I can die, but she can't." Yuan Tingshan laughed and said, "Whether you die or not depends on whether I'm in a good mood or not. But she can't die. Why can't she? With your mediocre skills. Or do you think you can scare me with your identity as a Fushui room's man of sacrifice?" The young man from the Fu Shui room wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth with his thumb and said, "Of course I can't." The young Bailiang man of sacrifice, who was determined to die, grinned and said, "In your Liaodong territory, you crazy dog Yuan can kill people. I can't stop you even if I risk my life. But do you dare to kill? Don't you find it strange that an ordinary storyteller can make me accompany her?" Yuan Tingshan put his palm on the hilt of the world's #1 talisman knife. "Oh. Now that you mention it, I'm almost scared to death." The young man said indifferently, "Her name is Ariu. She's a guest of our protector General Chu." The young man added, "She's also a friend of our prince. Although I don't know what the consequences will be if she dies in Liaodong, I'm sure that our prince will personally demand an explanation from the entire Liaodong." Yuan Tingshan suddenly gripped the Nanhua saber tightly and was about to pull it out to kill. Su Fingnian was far away in the northwest. Even if he was the prince of northern Liang who had 300,000 cavalrymen under his command, even if he was one of the 4 grandmasters in the world, Yuan Tingshan still wouldn't dare to kill a lowly Fu Shui room's men of sacrifice and an insignificant woman who could only earn money by telling stories. The Su Fingnian could barely take care of himself. How could he have the leisure to care about the life and death of a woman? However, at this moment, the great pillar of the state, Gu Jiantang, who had not stood up to greet the 2 groups of guests, had unknowingly stood near the railing and said to Yuan Tingshan downstairs, "Enough." Yuan Tingshan did not turn around. The Nanhua saber was about to be unsheathed and draw blood. Gu Jiantang turned around expressionlessly and sat back in his seat. However, the famous saber he had given to Yuan Tingshan appeared in his hand. Yuan Tingshan strode out of the restaurant and left Taiping town and Liaodong, returning to Ji province. The woman sighed softly. The matter that the immortal-like scholar Xia Guining had personally told her was most likely a failure. The reason Gu Jiantang was acting like this was actually to tactfully refuse the couple. Because Nanjiang and Western Shu treated Bailiang, or more accurately, Su Fingnian, differently. Qing Baishuang smiled and lowered her head to drink wine. The wine was not bad. Unfortunately, it was not the green ant wine that His Royal Highness talks about every day. Otherwise, it would be even better.